Hello and welcome to WGTC Radio, presented by the entertainment website We Got This Covered. I'm Jonathan Lack.
And I'm Sean Chapman.
And we're here to talk about stuff.
That we are.
Yes, specifically, we have a new podcast for your listening pleasure, whether you are a longtime reader of the website We Got This Covered, or a longtime reader, listener to what Sean and I have been doing on many websites, yourhub.com, Jonathan Lack at the Movies, through the Monthly 10 and Monthly Stuff podcast. This is actually WGTC Radio. New podcast is the third iteration of a podcast Sean and myself have been doing for about a year and a half now.
Yeah, and we've steadily gotten just like less and less specific names.
Yes.
Now we're WGTC Radio, and who knows, in a few years, it'll probably just be some sort of like geometric symbol. The podcast formerly known as WGTC Radio.
Yes. We started out as the Monthly 10 podcast, and this was on a Denver Post subsidiary called yourhub.com, was where that was hosted through. And the whole idea behind the Monthly 10 actually goes back further than that. It was a print column I did for YourHub, just doing top 10 lists of entertainment-related things. And then Sean and I decided we want to do that as a podcast. So for a couple months, we had really good top 10 related items we would do every month.
And then we realized that having a specific top 10 list for every podcast that we did was kind of difficult, and we were too lazy to do that for everything.
Yes. So we decided at the end of the first year that we were going to change the name, and the podcast was relaunched in January 2012 as the Monthly Stuff Podcast, which I still contend is the greatest name for a podcast ever.
I like the name, partially because I came up with it.
Yes.
I believe I came up with it on the podcast, too.
Yes, you did. We rebranded it. It was the last episode of the Monthly 10. We did not know we were changing it, and you just sort of...
I think I did it like halfway through the podcast.
You made the executive decision. We were now the Monthly Stuff, and we decided to stick with it. So, anyway, but now... I'm Jonathan Lack, if you don't know me, and I am the associate editor at the time of We Got This Covered, and like we said, it's the entertainment website that hopefully you've read if you're listening to this podcast. And as I've made the transition over to writing for this new publication, we've decided to move the podcast as well, so everything is a little more centralized, and so hopefully we can reach a larger audience, because, you know, we like doing this, and we hope other people enjoy what we do. And so that's why we have decided to relaunch the podcast a third time as WGTC Radio, and Sean's here along for the ride.
Yes, I am, because it wouldn't be the podcast without me.
No, it would not.
You people don't want to listen to Jonathan talk for an hour about his stuff without me making fun of him. So that's why I'm here. Thank
you, Sean. So that's what we are. We hope there's lots of new listeners this time. If you don't sort of know what we do, we basically we don't know what the exact timetable is going to be for WGTC Radio yet. Formerly on our last two iterations of the podcast, we did them monthly, but we're probably going to do them a little more frequently now.
And even then, we didn't stick to the monthly thing that
often.
Sometimes we would do 3 podcasts a month.
Yeah, sometimes one, sometimes two. So anyway, basically, every time we release a podcast, the podcast will be a fairly long discussion of something entertainment-related. We pick a topic every month or every 2 weeks, whatever. And it's usually it's always something that Sean and I are interested in. You will enjoy this podcast most if you have our very specific, narrow, set of interests.
I mean, I think if you're just someone who's interested in sort of pop culture, entertainment with
movies,
video games, stuff, specifically comic books for me, or Doctor Who is the most niche thing we do, because I'm a huge fan of Doctor Who, and that'll come up on the podcast eventually. So.
Oh yeah, it'll come up. There will be lots of Doctor Who discussions. So if you like all those things, we hope you'll enjoy this podcast. We make these podcasts pretty long, 2 to 3 hours usually, because personally, Sean and I really like long podcasts.
Yeah.
Because I feel I have plenty of time every day that I need something to listen to, and sort of just for fun, and I like long ones that I can break up into multiple listening segments or whatever. So that's why we do these, especially when we're not doing them every week. We want to give you as much sort of mileage for the podcast as we can. And so for new listeners, we hope you enjoyed today's show. We've got a topic that we hope will sort of introduce you to our personal tastes in pop culture, movies, that sort of thing. And we're going to be talking about our top 10 favorite movies of all time. Sean and I each have our own lists.
So even though it's not the monthly 10, we're doing top 10 lists, just to confuse you people.
Yes. And for existing listeners who were there with us through the monthly 10 when we had the worst audio recording equipment on the planet, and through the monthly stuff when we had better audio equipment. We hope you enjoy this new podcast. It is in your current feed of the monthly stuff, so if you are a monthly stuff subscriber, you're getting this episode. You probably won't get that many more episodes. You'll need to resubscribe. Just go into iTunes, search for WGTC Radio, or go to We Got This Covered, or go to jonathanlack.com. There will be links absolutely everywhere that you can find to subscribe to the new podcast. And we're sorry we have to do this to you again. Hopefully, we will not change it in the future for at least a year.
But yeah, no promises. Also, if you're a new listener, feel free to go into the backlog of our old podcasts, looking through for the monthly stuff and monthly 10, because I'm sure we're going to make references to stuff we talked about in those podcasts at some point.
Yes, and we'll try to be good about when we make those references to stop and make sure we tell you where to find it.
Yeah.
And who knows, we may, when we get lazy, just syndicate old episodes in this feed, and you won't even know the difference.
Yeah, except for, if we pull, the monthly 10 podcast stuff,
yeah.
I think they'll be able to tell from, us saying, welcome to the monthly 10 podcast for the week of, January 10th, 2010.
I was thinking I would edit around that.
In, really tinny, terrible audio.
Yes. So
they
anyway.
Release the remastered audio for the old monthly 10 podcasts.
I don't know if I could do that, because I don't think I have the original, audio masters, and even if I did, they weren't that good.
Yeah.
So
you're talking about the quality of the podcast itself, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is WGTC Radio. Let's get on to our topic. We have 19 separate movies. There's one overlap between our lists, and there's a lot to talk about with each of them. There's one or two movies in particular I know we're going to spend a gross amount of time on.
Yeah.
So that's our topic this month. We wanted a topic, again, that was sort of going to introduce us to our new and existing listeners and just sort of help orient you for this first episode of the new podcast. And it's about our tastes in movies, and what better way to do that than sort of by laying down each of our...
say what better way?
What better way? This is what Sean does. He makes fun of small mistakes anyone could make.
Well, I think, that's a fairly significant mistake. You got the pronunciation of that very common word completely wrong.
We're going to talk today...
what if we have a listener who has English isn't their first language? That could really confuse them and distract them.
Indeed it could.
I'm just looking out for you, the listener.
Thank you. Sean has
WGCC Radio Podcast.
Sean has your best interests at heart. Apparently I do not.
Of course you don't.
Okay. We're going to be talking about our top 10 favorite films of all time. This is, again, a topic we've probably wanted to do for a long time, but felt we had to hold off on for a special occasion, and this felt fairly special. So
yeah. I think rebranding the podcast for a third time is special enough.
Not special in all the right ways, but... special in certain sad ways, whatever. Okay, so we're going to talk about our top 10 favorite films. We each have our own lists. Again, there's only one movie that overlaps, which I think is really cool, because even though Sean and I largely like a lot of the movies on each other's lists,
yeah,
we don't have that same overlap, so we get to talk about more movies and sort of have better discussions about this. And before we get into the actual lists, and we'll go back and forth, number 10, on down the list, counting down to number 1, we want to talk about how you find standards for making a list like this. Because it's very difficult, because you say, okay, what are your favorite movies? And you make a list. Well, there are a million different ways you could go about making that. You could do, what are the best movies you've ever seen, from just a pure critical standpoint. And I can tell you right now, that would be very different than the list I made. And what are just the movies you love watching the most? And even that would be a little different, because it has to be sort of a mix of all these things. Mm-hmm. So, Sean, I'm going to throw it over to you first. What is sort of the framework you used for choosing which movies and how you're going to rank them on this list?
I think, I definitely went more from... favorite as what movie would I want to watch the most, and some of them I think I may have put a little higher on the list for their purely technical critical components and how remarkable they are as a technical achievement. But I very specifically decided when I was making the list that because there are a few directors that I really, really love, that I was going to pick only one movie from a certain director, or one movie from a certain series, so the list wouldn't be overpopulated with kind of similar types of movies. And then also, to help me out a lot on making the list, I decided to, this isn't strictly how it's structured, but I would kind of pick, because depending on your mood, and it's what you're kind of into at the time, your favorite movie might really change. I depicted my favorite movie in the horror genre, or the Western genre, or the science fiction genre, and kind of use that to help me structure the list. Because if you're just picking out flat out what are your 10 favorite movies, God knows how I would even begin to make that list without some sort of structure to it.
Right, and it's the same way for me. I did the exact same thing Sean did, where I had to limit myself and say, yes, there are directors I really like. And there's one director in particular that I know if I were to just go with my heart and say, what are my favorite movies without trying to find a structure, he would dominate the list and it wouldn't be that fun to talk about because you start talking about the same things over and over. And same with series. So I tried to limit all that. There did in the end, just because I had this crazy 5-way tie for number 10, the low spot, I broke it by going with one of that director's movies. So there's 2 of that person's films on the list, but obviously it could have been worse than if I didn't have that structure at all. So
you just broke your own rules.
Sort of.
You're living on the edge.
Yeah, and I guess the biggest framework I used wasn't just favorite movies, because favorite to watch, there'd be a lot of recent movies on there too, I think, and I sort of wanted to make it more universal to what sort of represents my tastes in film, and that's not the things I've recently been watching. It's more like, to me, what are the movies that made me fall in love with movies in the first place, and what movies sort of fostered my understanding of film as I went along, as a film critic, as a film watcher, and that's really what I wanted to do with this list, and I'm sort of proud of how it all laid out, because I think it really does, when you look at those 10, I think I can give that to someone and say, hey, if you look at these 10 movies, this is what I look for in film, and that's sort of what I wanted to do with the list, and I think I pulled that off. So ranking it was the hardest part, though. It was easy to get 9-10 movies together. Then trying to say which one do I put above that, it's scattershot. There's a 3-movie ranking on here that we'll get to that I put there completely for comedy purpose. They probably would be ranked differently. But I don't know how to rank. When you're getting down to I've seen hundreds and hundreds of movies, and getting down to just 10, the actual ranking of it, I knew what number 1 was easily, and then everything else was very difficult.
Yeah, kind of same with me. The specific rankings aren't set in stone for me or anything. It's it's kind of nebulous. I feel like my number 1 is my number 1, but all the other ones, it's if I say one movie I like more than another movie that's lower on the list on this occasion, don't get mad at me for inconsistency.
Right. I roughly like these 10 movies equally, I think.
Yeah, and, it's so hard to evaluate what you really mean by how you like the movie. It's not when you love a movie, it's not you've got that specific feeling associated with that movie that you just really love, and you can't it's like a child. It's you can't say it's this is my favorite child.
And I think that's another good thing to talk about, is that when we get down to these movies, what was important to me was those movies, yes, that I just love unconditionally, where even if I can recognize critically a flaw in it, I don't care because I love the movie so much. And, that's an important thing when you talk about what your favorite movies are. It's not just movies you can watch over again, it's movies you almost have to because you really love them. So I think we've laid that down pretty well. So let's start. We're going to go back and forth. Sean's going to start us off with his number 10 favorite movie of all time.
My number 10, and this is my favorite specifically horror movie, is Dracula, the old Universal Pictures monster movie. And this was actually one of the hardest ones for me to do, because I really like 2 very different types of horror movies, but I like them for the same reason. I really love the old school Universal horror monster movies like Dracula, Frankenstein, The Wolfman, The Invisible Man. I love all those movies a lot. I love the style, the aesthetic. But then I also really love sort of 80s cheesy horror movies the other one that was on this list, and I changed it today, was John Carpenter's The Thing, which I really, really love. I think it's sort of a staple of horror movies, shows how you should make a horror movie, how to build tension. It's got amazing special effects. And all those sort of John Carpenter movies, or say a David Cronenberg movie, David Cronenberg's The Fly, they're all really gory special effects movies, but I love them so much. But I decided ultimately that I had to go with a Universal horror monster movie, because those are the movies that I really grew up with. My dad grew up with them, and a lot of these movies are things that kind of my dad passed down to me, that I grew up with these movies, and Dracula is probably my favorite out of all of them. It was really down to Dracula and Frankenstein. But I think Dracula, honestly, is, even though a lot of those movies have aged and they're not particularly scary anymore, obviously, because they were made in the 30s. So it's really different how you evaluate what's a horror movie in the 30s compared to now, where it's blood and guts and CGI special effects all over the place. But Dracula still is able, even today I feel, build tension really well. Just using, it's just shot so well. The acting, obviously Bela Lugosi's Dracula, is just such a fascinating performance, where he's the most vampire of any vampire you can see in a movie. He never blinks. He's always staring at you. Everything he does is so cold and calculated. When he looks at people, you feel like he's looking at them like they're a piece of food to him, and he just manipulates them so casually. And they just build the horror, they build the tension, and they build this very dark mystery. All the the black and white photography is just so beautiful, and it gets you so involved in the film. And there's just so many characters and moments that I love. Like there's the oh god, I can't even remember the character's name, but he's the character who kind of gets driven insane by Dracula, and he comes running into the room, and he's obsessed with the idea of life and taking life from something, and he starts with like eating bugs, and then Dracula shows him this vision of rats, and he runs into the room, he's like, rats! Rats! Hundreds, millions of them, all with red blood! There's so many great, just crazy Universal horror monster movie performances in Dracula that you have to love it. I mean, it's a classic movie for a reason. It's defined how you look at vampires, and every Halloween that comes around, I watch all these Universal horror monster movies, and Dracula has to be the one that I look forward to the most, just because it's paced the best, it uses suspense the best, and it's just a damn good movie.
Is this the kind of movie that you sort of hold off on watching? So it sort of like
I watch it once every year on Halloween. I never will watch it not on Halloween.
That's a side of a movie I really love, where I know even if I want to watch it, I hold off on it so that it like retains its power and I don't spoil it for myself or anything. I have not seen Dracula, but
well, you're a terrible person then.
Okay, sorry. Thank you, Sean. But actually, welcome. This is a question I think we should talk about with the movies we talk about on this list. If someone wants to see Dracula, they're swayed by your argument. What's probably the best way to find it now?
I mean, there's a ton of different DVD releases. Honestly, the one thing I love is we got a really long time ago. I think if my brother bought it, it was when that it was a Hugh Jackman movie, Van Helsing, came out. That was like kind of reinterpretation of Van Helsing. It's like an okay kind of like action movie with some cool ideas in it. But my brother bought the box set of it, which came with Van Helsing, but it also came with 2 DVDs that had Dracula, Frankenstein, and the Wolfman on them. And nice. So that's how I watch them, just because they're all in one place. Like, it's kind of like the DVD you flip over, and on the other side it's got the B-side movie. But, I mean, I'm sure you can... I mean, it's such an old movie. There's probably like a 60th anniversary edition DVD, like a 70th anniversary edition DVD.
Yeah.
So I would just go out, if there's got to be box sets, I would honestly try to find a box set that has all of these movies together, because they all have that same sort of atmosphere and that same sort of style to it that kind of defined horror for basically up until like the 50s and 60s, when the Hammer horror movies took it over. And so I would, if you're interested in watching these movies, I would definitely seek out a good box set.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So for my number 10, we're going... I love the contrast between our number 10s, because we're going as far in the other direction as we possibly could.
See, I don't even know what this movie is.
Okay.
On the list, so I'm interested.
My number 10 is a Japanese animated film by master animator Hayao Miyazaki called Tonari no Totoro, in English, My Neighbor Totoro. Hopefully you've heard of it, and if you haven't...
I've heard of My Neighbor Totoro.
Okay.
Tonari no Totoro.
Yeah.
That's throwing me off.
I like it because of the original alliteration in there. It's fun to say. So, My Neighbor Totoro... Well, let me back up.
It sounded like when you said that, it sounded like you're talking about your literal neighbor, Totoro.
Yeah.
It's like, neighbor, Totoro.
I wish Totoro was my neighbor. But anyway, my favorite director is Hayao Miyazaki. No contest, he's my favorite filmmaker. His films are my favorite films, and that's why I had to not put too many of them on here. He's the kind of director where, animated or no, his movies are just transcend what we in America think animation can do, because we're limited by having seen mainly Disney movies, and even though we have had sort of a resurgence in quality thanks to Pixar, that doesn't come close to what Hayao Miyazaki has accomplished in his animation. And I can watch his movies with my just completely full critical gaze on, analyze them as deeply as I can, and I just cannot find fault in them for the large part. He has not made, a series of perfect movies, obviously no director has.
Yeah, well, other than my favorite directors.
Okay. Anyway. But My Neighbor Totoro is often called his masterpiece, along with maybe one or two others. There's a lot of disagreement as to which one it is. I have one more of his movies on this list. It's higher, that I feel personally I like a little bit more, but Totoro to me is a very, very special movie. If you are not familiar with it, it's his third movie with Studio Ghibli, the studio he created, and it came out in 1988. and it's an 85-minute animated movie about these two little girls, Satsuki and Mei, who move out to sort of the Japanese countryside with their father because their mother is in the hospital, and they want to be there for her while she's in the hospital, and then if she gets out, they want her to have fresh air and sort of this beautiful countryside for her to be in. And as the two little girls are sort of dealing with this move and sort of the complicated emotions that come with their mother being in the hospital and possibly dying, I mean, the level of implication there is sort of up to the viewer. They meet this forest spirit named Totoro, who is the most iconic image in Japanese animation, probably. He's sort of...
Other than Goku.
No, I mean, Totoro's really is everywhere. I mean, he's
Goku
sort of like...
is everywhere.
Okay, I am going to argue that Totoro is probably more iconic than a character who has probably less worldwide appeal.
So, I mean...
okay.
Well, I mean, in America, at least.
My point is...
It's Goku.
My point is, you may be familiar
Everyone
with...
knows who Goku is.
Okay, that's great.
The listener knows who Goku is. I don't even have to explain it.
Okay, thank you, Sean.
You have to explain yours.
I wasn't interrupting you during your Dracula talk.
Well, that's because my Dracula talk was really powerful and emotional in it.
I'm going to get powerful and emotional here, and if you would let me,
okay.
I would keep talking about this great movie that means a lot to me.
Okay.
Anyway, they meet this forest spirit named Totoro. He's this sort of giant bear creature, very fluffy, very friendly, and he sort of guides them through their grieving period by being just the best friend they could ask for and just sort of being there for him. It's not a movie with plot. It's not a movie with it's a movie with forward momentum, but it's not a movie about story. It's sort of in the tradition of some other famous Japanese directors like Yasuhiro Ozu. It's very much about sort of life itself, and that, we don't really in life encounter, forest spirits like Totoro, but in real life we don't have stories and plots and beginnings, middles, and endings. It's sort of a series of moments, and our emotional states change from these moments, and that's sort of what Miyazaki does here, and it's an absolutely beautiful movie. I had to include it on this list because I do honestly believe if I were making a different kind of list, like a best of movies I can look at critically and say these are the best I've ever seen, Totoro would be one of the ones in contention for number one. It is an absolutely flawless movie. And it's sort of known as one of the greatest kids movies ever made because it's about children. It's sort of aimed at children, but Miyazaki has always spoken about how he believes if a children's movie is made with honesty and truth and conviction, it will appeal to all ages. And that's what Totoro defines. And to me, if I had to sum up the power of what this movie does so well, sort of simply, is I think it is the greatest movie I've ever encountered about dealing with grief. And especially the grief of losing a loved one or going through that process. And it's something I've gone through it multiple times in my life, especially when I actually was the age of these kids and, was losing my grandparents. And Satsuki and Mei are just such well-observed characters. And I don't know if I've ever seen a better depiction of little girls or of little children in a movie than this, and just sort of the purity of it, and how they relate to their parents, and that they don't have to get into these big things that we do in American movies about them fighting with each other or fighting with their parents. It's just sort of about them being kids and how they process these really complicated emotions, because they have no context for how to process their mother being away from them. And so the movie is known for being very happy and whimsical, but there's this underlying sadness to it that is really powerful and hooks me right away, and it makes it really special to me. And I think the way Miyazaki, again, goes through the movie and uses Totoro in these moments where the kids need him most. I think Totoro only makes 4 appearances in the whole movie. That's part of the thing Miyazaki does well, is pacing. He's got this great iconic character, and he doesn't use him too much. And so when Totoro appears, it's very meaningful, and it's very powerful, and he only appears in the moments the kids need him most, and I think by the end, the amount of emotion Miyazaki brings up, I do wind up tearing up in this movie at multiple points every time I watch it, and it's a whimsical movie. It makes you feel good, but it also makes you contemplate
I'm totally depressed right now, by the way.
Some of the most complex emotions of your life. And I think a movie that can capture sort of those mini dichotomies that we live with, both as children and then as adults, is very powerful. And it's a movie that means an awful lot to me. It's absolutely beautiful, just visually speaking. Every frame of this movie is a work of art that you could hang on a wall or put in a museum. and it's just flawlessly animated. Joe Hisaishi's score. Joe Hisaishi, legendary composer who's done all of Miyazaki's films. This is one of his crowning achievements musically. There are themes in here that he actually wound up sort of reworking and reusing in later Miyazaki movies because they are so good. And he again captures just the whimsy and wonder of this world these children inhabit. And there's particularly one scene that if you've seen the movie you know exactly what I'm talking about, where Totoro helps these little girls build these seeds they've planted into this giant tree, and you combine that with the sort of swelling music and everything, and it is just visual rhapsody. It is an amazing sequence that you get swept up in. This movie is pure magic, and I had to include it on this list because it really is. It means a lot to me on many emotional levels, but it also just, if you want a movie that, like, if you feel bad or you just need something to sort of uplift you, this is the kind of movie to watch, and I really love it, so...
Can I ask you, how do you feel about like the dubbed version versus the subtitles?
Okay, that's a good one.
Because actually, you have the DVD right here, and you've got Tim Daly. If that's the same Tim Daly I'm thinking of, that's also the guy who voiced Superman in like the Superman animated series.
It may have been, and he's not bad in it.
Is Superman in it? Like,
no,
because that'd be awesome.
Well, let's talk a little bit about this. The DVD I have is the most recent Disney Special Edition release of My Neighbor Totoro, which is the version I would recommend getting. It's got the complete original storyboards, a lot of good bonus features, original Japanese with pretty good subtitles, and then the English dub. But your question is a little complicated because there are 2 English dubs for My Neighbor Totoro that have been out in America.
Pick the one that has Superman in it.
Okay. Well, let's just do a little history
Unless
first.
the other one has like Kevin Conroy who voices Batman, then it's like, God, which one do I watch?
Yeah. No, the original dub was done by Fox before Disney acquired the rights to all the Ghibli movies, and it came out in 1992 on VHS. I have not seen that version, but I know people have a lot of fond respect for that dub, and people say it is better than the Disney version that is on the current DVD release. The current DVD release of the dub, I don't like that dub. I don't like dubs in the first place, so I'm sort of a biased answer to that. Mm-hmm. But it's for the 2 little girls who are the main characters. You know, Tim Daly would be playing the father, who is not a huge character. And I've sampled it. He's okay.
Superman.
I think he's wrong for the part, and Tim Daly's a great Superman. I'm not gonna deny that. It's just he's a little bit, and maybe it's because they give him the dub script I don't really like. It's a little too on the nose. But the 2 little girls in English are voiced by Dakota and Elle Fanning, who are real sisters who are the actual ages of the girls, and that's kind of cool. But the way they ask the girls, like, directorially to interpret the characters is wrong. And I that's where I would not recommend the dub, because, like, they make Dakota Fanning voice Satsuki as sort of flippant in a couple of places, and that's as far away from that character as you can get. She's very, very respectful, and she's one of my favorite Miyazaki characters, and I don't like how Dakota Fanning does that voice. And then Elle Fanning is not sort of big enough a voice for May, because May is this little girl who is sort of this legendary little girl character because she's got such a giant personality, and she can be so loud and boisterous, but also you sort of love her for it. And you do lose that in the dub, I think. So I absolutely go with the Japanese version, but if you've got little kids and you want to show them this movie, which you should, it's better than any Disney movie, any DreamWorks movie you could possibly find, show them the dub. It's good. They will not misinterpret the movie for it.
And then show them Superman the Animated Series starring Tim Daly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, anyway. So again, I recommend the DVD version of this from Disney. Disney has 2 separate DVDs. This most separate special edition is probably the one to get. It's also coming out on Blu-ray in Japan this summer, and I'm thinking of dropping the $100 it'll take for me to import it, but that's a big decision.
Why not just wait until they probably release the Blu-ray here?
It's going to take forever, though. Like, they're on like a 3-year delay.
Does it take $100 forever?
I don't know. Maybe it's worth it. Who knows? That $100 would also get me the movie Grave of the Fireflies, because they're doing it in a 2 DVD set.
Oh, okay.
That's a fun fact about My Neighbor Totoro, is that when it premiered in Japan, it was the most bipolar double feature of all time. It came out with the other Studio Ghibli movie from that year, Grave of the Fireflies, by Isao Takahata, which is probably the most adult, depressing animated movie of all time. Or at least in Japanese history. It's a war movie about these 2 orphans whose parents were killed in the fire bombings of World War II, and this brother trying to take care of his little sister, and the sister dies at the end of the movie, and...
Yeah, that's also really depressing.
And so pairing it with My Neighbor Totoro was, like, just from a film critical standpoint, great double feature, but for kids at the time, it made the double feature bombed because parents were, like, running their kids out of the theater and stuff, so that's kind of funny, but... Let's go on to number 9.
And this is like you were making fun of how different is like going from Dracula to My Neighbor Totoro. I think this is an even like bigger like thematic leap.
This is great. I can't wait for this.
Okay, so you had My Neighbor Totoro, which is a very thoughtful, emotional, but happy kind of Japanese anime movie by Hayao Miyazaki. Now we're moving over to my favorite comedy. This is what I think is legitimately the best comedy of all time, at least of any of the comedies I've seen. I can also say this is my favorite, and this is the best I've seen.
I have no disagreements.
This is, and if you've listened to a previous Monthly Stuff podcast where we talked about the best comedies,
yes,
this was featured. This is the Coen Brothers' The Big Lebowski, which is very different from My Neighbor Totoro.
It is.
If you haven't seen The Big Lebowski, it's a very difficult movie to describe, and it's also a movie that I've never encountered someone who's only seen the movie once and liked it. But I've encountered a lot of people who've seen the movie twice and love it.
Yes.
So if you're looking to see The Big Lebowski, you're not going to like it the first time. You're going to wait 6 months, and then you're just going to be somehow drawn to watching it again, and then it's going to be one of your favorite movies. I swear that's going to happen to you because it's happened to everyone I know.
It's true, and Sean and I saw this independent of each other, not talking about it, and we have pretty much the same experience of getting the DVD, watching it, being like, huh.
This is kind of a weird movie. It's kind of funny.
And then going back to it and being like, this is the greatest thing
ever. This is like
the
best movie ever. I've seen this movie I don't know how many times, but it's got Jeff Bridges, John Goodman, and Steve Buscemi as sort of like the three main characters, but it's mostly about Jeff Bridges, who's this character called the Dude, who's one of my favorite characters. He's basically like a hippie, but it's past when the hippies are supposed to be around. So he just like lounges around doing nothing all day, getting high. And he spends most of his time going to a bowling alley with his friends, John Goodman and Steve Buscemi, and bowling.
Walter and Donnie.
Yeah, Walter and Donnie. And he somehow gets embroiled in this, like, kidnapping conspiracy because his name is Jeff Lebowski, which also happens to be the name of the Big Lebowski, Jeff Lebowski.
Who's the richest man in town.
Yeah, who's the richest man in town, whose wife gets kidnapped, kind of, maybe, sort of. He kidnaps her, and it's like some crazy scheme. There's a porn star thing going on. The plot to the movie is completely ridiculous, and it's so hard to understand, which is part of the joke, because it's really satirizing, in a weird way, it's satirizing sort of like detective fiction with like just really confusing plots. It throws in all these different detective movie cliches, but the best part is the characters and how the Dude, and particularly Walter, John Goodman's character, who's a Vietnam War veteran, who can't let go of the fact that he's a Vietnam War veteran, and he's just... This is John Goodman's best performance by far.
Oh,
I love John Goodman, but this is like my favorite thing he's ever done, where his character is always like on 100%. He's super aggressive, and he makes this great contrast to the Dude, who's usually really laid back, but Walter's the only guy who can get on his nerves, and it's these two people trying to deal with this situation in the most ridiculous way possible.
And I like to imagine... how did these people become friends?
Yeah, that's the best part. Is like, because I mean they're already really good friends by the beginning of the movie. They spend all the time bowling, and yeah, it's like how did crazy Vietnam veteran Walter run into like super laid back hippie Dude who spends all of his time getting high or drinking like White Russian vodkas? Like, yeah. It's so hard to describe why this movie is funny. There's so many great lines, and it's a movie that one of the reasons why you have to watch it multiple times is that, even now, I've seen the movie probably at least 8 to 10 times by now, and even now, every time I watch the movie, I'll catch another something, like a background joke, like something I didn't notice before, something like you can spend the entire movie watching Steve Buscemi as Donnie in the background of all these scenes, because the main joke about Donnie's character is that he's really superfluous. He's basically the third wheel of the group, and he's in a whole bunch of scenes, but he's not doing anything. He's just in the background. And just watching Steve Buscemi react to the conversations between Jeff Bridges and John Goodman, and it's like you can understand the scene just by how Donnie reacts to everything.
You probably can't hear this on the podcast, but Sean's describing the movie, and I'm over here laughing because you just think about it, and it's funny.
It's such a funny movie.
I think this is one of my favorites too. I don't know, it's not my top 10, and part of that is I knew Sean would have it, and so we could talk about it on his list. Mm-hmm. But the number one thing I like in movies, and Sean touched on this, is I'm a character kind of person.
Yeah,
that's what I look for in movies. Yeah. And that's why Totoro's on the list, and that's the only connection you could make between the two movies, is I just love watching the characters. And Big Lebowski, like, just the interactions, and even the little tiny characters on the sides are fun to watch. Like John Turturro.
John Turturro as the Jesus, who he has, like, probably 2 minutes total of screen time, and he is one of the most memorable characters in cinema. Like, you watch this movie and nobody forgets about John Turturro as the Jesus.
Right.
Who has nothing to do with anything.
No.
He has literally no connection to the plot at all. And he's, like, in the side of, like, 2 scenes.
Yep. One of my favorite things to do with The Big Lebowski is sometimes they show it here in Denver at the Esquire, which is a landmark theater we have in Denver, Colorado. And they do these midnight film screenings, and they do The Big Lebowski every couple months. And it's so fun to see it with a crowd who will, like, shout out lines and laugh at it. And just see that everyone laughs at different things, so there's, like, a constant buzz of laughter during the movie.
Yeah, because it hits on so many different levels of, like, comedy. Yeah, like, a lot of people draw at different things that they really love about the movie from it. It's just... I mean, I can't stress... It's so hard to talk about comedies and why comedies work and why they're funny. But I can't stress it enough that if you haven't watched the movie, you need to watch it, and you will inevitably watch it again and then fall in love with it.
Yeah.
It's just how... There's something weird about how that movie works, that it just has this allure to it. And it's one of the biggest... sort of like cult films out there. I mean, it's got a huge...
It's got a festival.
Yeah, it's got its own, like, Lebowski festival. It's got, I mean, where everyone gets together and they bowls.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite things about that movie, is just the weird thing about bowling. It's just, they spend all their time at a fucking bowling alley. And there's just, I mean, there's so many things. There's, like, Sam Elliott's character as the narrator, who just, like, comes into the scene and talks with the dude for like one scene and then leaves, and you have no idea why he's there or why he's the narrator for the story. There's these group of like German people who you suspect are supposed to be the culprits of the kidnapping, and they make all these jokes about them being nihilists, and they like go around saying that they believe in nothing all the time.
Yeah.
There's just so many things funny about this movie.
Well, and here's something I'll say. If we're analyzing the comedy, I think, ironically enough, these same things that make Big Lebowski a great comedy and make No Country for Old Men a great drama are sort of the same thing. It's what the Coen brothers do, and it's just, they just have to turn the dial a little bit and it becomes comedy. Mm-hmm. Like, No Country for Old Men is not funny. It's a very dark, very heavy movie. But I can imagine a version of that where they turn the dial a little bit and they give Josh Brolin or Tommy Lee Jones a John Goodman-esque friend, and it becomes a comedy. Like Big Lebowski, you could reverse engineer it to a drama.
Yeah, you really could. You could take sort of like the building blocks of it and turn it into like a legitimate detective movie.
Yes, and I mean, it's shot by Roger Deakins, who is the best working cinematographer in America, probably. And those sorts of things, where they are really dedicated to the filmmaking craft of it, and that's part of it, is they craft such a precise, funny atmosphere.
Yeah, because, I mean, one of the interesting things about The Big Lebowski is that it's a straight comedy. I mean, it's totally a comedy movie. But sort of the way it looks and the way it's shot doesn't make it look like it's a comedy. Like, it looks like it's a legitimate, like, dramatic film. And it's just got all these great characters with all these interesting contrasts, and you can actually pull a lot of like legitimate sort of like analytical interpretation from it, of like about like Buddhist philosophy and like how the dude is always meditating, and through meditation he's able to solve the mystery, kind of.
Because he's not a bad detective.
Yeah,
all things
he's
considered.
not. He really isn't a bad detective. He's just dealing with the most complicated situation you could possibly imagine.
They finally did it. They killed my fucking car.
They killed your fucking car, dude.
Do you have a favorite moment? Because I always go back to the "This is what happens" scene.
There's that scene.
Do you want to act it out for us?
Because, yeah, there's a scene in the movie where they go, this fucking scene, where they find that, like, the dude's car has been stolen, and they find, like, an essay that, like, a student has wrote, and it's, like, graded, and they use that to track down the kid's house, and they think that they've used the money in the dude's car, to buy like a really expensive car. And so John Goodman just walks out and he starts yelling, "This is what happens, Donnie! This is what happens when you fuck a stranger in the ass!" And he just beats the shit out of the car. And then a neighbor to the house comes out and runs in and just like punches John Goodman. It's like, "What the fuck are you doing? This is my fucking car. What the fuck are you doing?" And it's like that scene. It's nothing to do, like, this scene has nothing to do with anything else in the movie. It's like, they go to this weird dead end, have a really hilarious scene, and then just leave.
Yes.
But another thing you can do with The Big Lebowski that I discovered was that if you can find a version, like the TV version of it that's censored, like you have to see the original version twice already. But it's like, one of the experiments that you can do to rewatch The Big Lebowski is watch the TV censored version, because this movie cusses more than any other, this has more F-bombs than anything. I've never seen a movie, other than, like, maybe Scarface has, like, the same amount of F-bombs as this movie. But to see them try to bleep everything out, like, in that scene where John Goodman is shouting, "Well, this is what happens when you fuck a stranger in the ass." In the edited version, they changed it to, "This is what happens! This is what happens when you find a stranger in the Alps! This is what happens!" Like, who comes up with that fucking line?
That's like the greatest TV censor of all time. It's right up there with Yippee-Ki-Yay Melon Farmer from the Die Hard edit. I love those.
This is what happens when you find a stranger in the Alps.
Yes. So...
Yeah, but I think if we keep talking about it, we're just going to go on quoting lines about it forever.
One day we'll do the whole Big Lebowski podcast. I don't know.
It's like, but it really is, if you haven't watched it yet, there's, I think it's God, I don't know, it's like, maybe it's like a 15th anniversary edition.
There are 2 DVDs out, yeah. There's 2 DVDs and then now the Blu-ray version out. And the old DVD you can probably find anywhere for like $5.
Yeah, that's the one.
It's got a black case and it's just the dude's face. And then there's that 15th anniversary, which is like all the characters and sort of a Photoshop thing with them in a bowling alley.
That's the one that I have, the 15th. And it's a good DVD. There's a lot of bonus features, like interviewing the Coen brothers, how they talk about the movie. And they interview Jeff Bridges, and he has there's actually this really cool special feature on that DVD where Jeff Bridges has, I think he does this for most of the movies he goes to. He has like this photo gallery of photos he took on the set.
I remember that. It's
and
cool.
He goes through and talks about each of the pictures. They're like really high quality pictures, and he like talks about his experience making the movie. It's really cool.
So get the DVD. There's no risk to it. You'll love the movie.
Yeah, just make sure you watch it twice.
Indeed. All right, so my number 9 is a movie you've probably heard of.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a little obscure.
It's called Star Wars. It's from 1977. And, it was this little independent movie this up-and-coming filmmaker made about a boy who goes to find his destiny in the stars. Just kidding. It's Star Wars. What more can you say about it? I just want you to know, we're going to be talking about Harrison Ford on my side of the list for about the next hour.
Yeah, I can see the next 2 movies, so yeah, I can see that.
Because Harrison Ford, gun to my head, is my favorite actor. And in terms of the number of movies he's done that I love as unconditionally love every moment in them. And Star Wars is the first of those. And we did 3 whole podcasts during the monthly 10. This was in 2011 about Star Wars.
That was one of our ones where we did 3 podcasts in a month.
Yes, and you should go listen to those. They're really good podcasts. We had fun talking about them.
Yeah.
And what I said at the time, and what I still believe is, Star Wars is a movie that I can watch over and over and over again and never, ever get tired of. And I think it's practically a perfect movie, or as close as movies can come to being, where I just can't find fault with it. Because I love the pacing and the story where there's it doesn't feel like there's any weight on there's weight to the movie, but there's no fat on the movie.
Yeah.
It's it just moves.
Yeah, it's very streamlined. There's no excessive subplots or anything that drag the movie down. It's what the movie's doing, what's going on at every moment, and the movie just goes. Yeah, It's one of the most perfectly paced movies I've seen. I completely agree with that.
Yeah, and just the way you start, and I also love the way it builds, that you start in this little tiny shithole of a sand dune, in Tatooine, and it grows to be Mos Eisley, and then it grows to be sort of just space, and then the Death Star, and then Yavin, and sort of the other worlds they visit, and the fight with the Death Star, and it's just this perfect build. The special effects, no matter how you watch it, but to me, especially in the original theatrical version, are just awe-inspiring.
I love the special effects.
And
the old
people, using CGI today, no one using CGI can craft an action sequence as good as the Death Star run. that is just perfection. And it's partially because you know the characters so well, but you also, the stakes have been laid out. Mm-hmm. You see the space of it. It's well paced. It sort of has slow moments and fast moments. But all of it, it's just, I really love it. And again, it comes down to the characters for me. And this is why I've always said I like the original Star Wars more than Empire Strikes Back. I mean, they're practically equal, but like gun to my head, again, I choose the original one just because I really love the characters in the movie, and I like this one because it has Ben Kenobi, Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, and Leia, and R2-D2 and 3PO all together for the majority of the movie.
You forgot Chewie.
And Chewie! Oh my God!
How could you forget Chewie? You horrible, terrible person.
Chewie's my favorite character. I don't know how I did that.
You're a terrible human being. That's what you are.
Okay, well, we're gonna try to move past this.
Darth Vader, of course.
Yes, and they're all, and that's my point, is that they're all on the hero side at least. Obviously, Darth Vader doesn't interact with them all that much, but they're all together for the majority of the movie, or at least the second act. And I love sort of all the interplay. And I mean, in Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, the relationship you sort of lose actually is Luke and Han. You don't get as much of them as you do in this one, and I really like that dynamic. Obviously, the best dynamic, just for pure fun to watch, is probably Han and Leia. Especially in this period where they just hate each other's guts before sort of romance is put into it. Yeah. And it's just, I love it. And I don't think we need to spend that much time talking about Star Wars because you've seen it, and if you know what's great about it. And again, I mean, if we're going to have this Harrison Ford block, I've said Chewie's my favorite character just from sort of the nostalgic standpoint, but Han Solo really is just one of my favorite cinematic characters of all time. And from the moment he doesn't even step on screen. He's sitting with his feet up on the table on screen. He owns this movie. And it's just like, Harrison Ford, it's sort of funny, his biography is that he was a carpenter. He tried becoming an actor, and he wasn't getting parts, and he had a wife and kids, so he decided to just go start doing woodwork. Mm-hmm. And he was introduced to George Lucas because he did work in his office, building George Lucas's office or something like that. It may have been Coppola, and then Coppola introduced them. And he got the small part in American Graffiti because of that. But and then in Star Wars, he stumbled across the role in sort of the same way, where he was reading lines to help George Lucas, and then they decided to cast him. But it is so weird to me how synonymous he is with this character and how iconic this character is, and how Harrison Ford can just walk on screen and inhabit a role and just sort of command your attention and be so funny but also complicated and badass and all of these things at the same time. And I obviously Empire Strikes Back probably is a better showcase for him because he has just some amazing moments in that. But again, I love the whole cast dynamic. People, for some reason, and I don't really get it, like to make fun of Mark Hamill nowadays, but he's great in this movie.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is that, like, he has sort of he has to have kind of like a wimpy role as Luke Skywalker, where he's kind of the audience proxy, and a lot of people don't like audience proxy characters.
But he's a really interesting one.
Yeah, and he's the most essential, and he's the least interesting in this one because he doesn't get that much really cool stuff to do. But I think they developed Luke Skywalker in the other movies to be a really interesting character.
Yes. And but I even think he's interesting here because it's hard to pull off the sort of everyman audience proxy and make him someone you not only are interested in but want to follow on this journey. Mm-hmm. And I think you do have an immediate connection with Luke Skywalker. And I love Alec Guinness in this movie too. He's so amazing as Kenobi, and it's so fun to watch him, especially sort of training Luke. And of course, again, Han Solo making fun of everyone he comes in contact with, and their hokey religion.
I mean, I think one of my favorite scenes using Han Solo in this specific movie is when they've infiltrated the Death Star and they go to the detention level, and then like the big firefight goes out, and then Han Solo runs to the console, and he's like trying to like keep them from sending people down. It's like, we're all fine here, everything's fine.
How are you?
How are you?
That's Harrison Ford's finest hour.
Yeah, and then he just like shoots the console. It's like, it was an interesting conversation, anyways.
Look, we're gonna have company.
Yeah, like the whole movie just has this like great energy, especially when Harrison Ford comes in. Like Harrison Ford is one of the most like charismatic, most instantly likable people.
Yes.
Of any actors you can see on a screen, and just like the charm that he brings to the Han Solo role, just like really drives the whole Death Star section of that movie.
Yeah. So it's great. I love Star Wars. I can watch it again. It's one of those movies I can just watch so many times. I've probably seen it more than any other movie. I have to think that because I've owned it so many times, and I saw it at such a young age. Like, here, I have with me right now in the studio, I have the Blu-ray set of Star Wars, I have the DVD set of the original theatrical versions in this Best Buy tin, and then I have the old special edition VHS tapes.
I have those too, yeah.
Which I've kept just for sentimental value. And this is how I probably originally saw the movie, was on these old full-screen tapes. And I pull it out, and I have such nostalgia, and I still will once in a while watch it this way, just because it's like, that's how I originally experienced it. Mm-hmm. And when I was first falling in love with Star Wars, you know, the prequels were coming out, and for a time I was more interested in those, because they're such, for little kids, they're probably more interesting.
Yeah, because they look like they're really new and flashy.
Yeah, but, you know, slowly, probably before, around the time Episode 2 came out,
the boring one.
Yeah, I was watching Episode 4 more and more and more, and falling in love with it. And it was one where I think there was probably a point where I was watching it once a week, just because I wanted to know more about it. I was analyzing the structure of it, and I was sort of realizing this movie feels so big, but really it's not that big. They just go to the Death Star and then they go to Yavin, and that's it. But
it implies a really huge, larger science fiction universe, which is one of the most important things to do in a science fiction movie. And even though Star Wars is sci-fi fantasy, like, it's not straight science fiction, it does that probably better than anything I've ever seen, where it implies a larger universe that all these characters inhabit.
There's one other sci-fi movie I feel does that even more, but it's sort of a special scenario, and we'll get to that. It's another Harrison Ford one, but we'll get to that.
I wonder what that could be.
And we'll talk about it. It's that news movie he did with Rachel McAdams last year.
Oh, okay, yeah. Just like the larger, just very interesting universe that we all want to dive into.
Yes.
I don't know why it's not a franchise yet.
So that's my number 8. It's Star Wars. We may talk about Star Wars more on this countdown. Who knows?
It's
hard to decide. Okay, so Sean, let's hear about your number 8 movie.
My number 8 is The Good, The Bad, and The Ugly.
All 3 of them?
Well, I think it's just one movie.
Okay.
I don't know. I mean, there is The Good and the Bad and the Ugly. This is another one that was really hard to narrow down. This is my favorite Western, and I hadn't actually been that hugely interested in Western movies until relatively recently, about, I would say 3 years ago is when I decided, I was like, I want to sit down and watch a bunch of the old school, classic Western movies, because I haven't seen much, and Westerns aren't really something that come out that often today, and when they do, they tend to be remakes, like the True Grit remake or the 310 to Yuma remake. But for this one, it really came down to me between The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly and The Searchers with John Wayne, and directed by John Ford. And I would probably say The Searchers is a better movie, technically, but there's something about The Good and the Bad and the Ugly that weirdly, it does a similar thing to Star Wars, where it implies this larger sort of fictional cliche Western world that these characters inhabit, and it's such a big, huge movie that goes on such a long journey where you follow these characters trying to find this lost treasure, this gold that's buried in a cemetery somewhere, and they're all trying to find it. And it's such a huge, long story where it really does feel like it's multiple movies. It's actually kind of interesting how a lot of people call this, with A Fistful of Dollars and A Few Dollars More, they call this a trilogy because it's got Clint Eastwood as the star in all 3 movies, even though they're not really connected. Because, Lee Van Cleef, who's the bad in this movie, is a second protagonist in For a Few Dollars More, playing a completely different character. So I don't really understand why everyone calls them a trilogy all packed together.
I've not seen these movies, but I didn't know that, and it's sort of interesting because not only do people call them that, they're always sold as that. It's hard to find.
That's how I have it, is in the Dollars trilogy. And then it's also got, it's the Clint Eastwood Western collection. It's got the Dollars trilogy, and then also has, Hang 'em High at Noon or something. It's some movie about Clint Eastwood getting hanged, but he doesn't get hanged, and then he kills people. Just like most Clint Eastwood movies.
Clint Eastwood kills people.
Well, and what you were saying about Harrison Ford is also something that I really feel bad. As far as action stars go, Clint Eastwood's my favorite. Because when I was constructing this list, I was thinking about if I wanted to put a straight action movie, kind of like a Die Hard on the list, and I was like, oh no, it's I'm already kind of filling up the list. And if it had been one, it would have been Dirty Harry. Just because Clint Eastwood is that fucking badass. Clint Eastwood is so badass that he's a really old guy now. He could still kick anyone's ass. You just look at Clint Eastwood and you would not want to fuck with the guy. He squints at you once and you just piss your pants and run away.
Reference Gran Torino.
Yeah, seriously, Gran Torino. That's another great Clint Eastwood movie where you just see, even though he's really old, he's a scary fucking dude. But going back to The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, I think it's a movie that, I mean, it's really, really beautifully shot. It really showcases sort of what the sort of like the spaghetti western style. I think it's, of all the spaghetti westerns I've seen, it like brings that style up to sort of its pinnacle, and it really takes that genre and takes that sort of like aesthetic that they go for shooting in Italy, and it makes it like just so perfect. Like the colors are so vibrant and the landscapes are so huge and dramatic, and it's such a long journey where you're following Clint Eastwood and I can't remember the guy's name, the ugly character. You follow them for so long, and they go on such a huge journey that when I think about it as like different parts of movies, because there's all these. It's kind of like Apocalypse Now, where there's a lot of different little sections, little venues, like little things that happen to them on their journey that don't necessarily connect to each other in like a chronological plot kind of way, but really connect to each other thematically. Like they encounter this civil war battle between these two sides. It's a really long section of the movie. And it really has not much to do with anything, except for it just kind of gives you a sense of the chaos going on in the background in this landscape and the warring factions. That everything is so chaotic. There's no law. There's no government getting in the way, and everything is just kind of like death and destruction. And you're following these characters trying to find some way to live. Because I mean, really, Clint Eastwood isn't a good guy in the traditional sense. He's the outlaw for this entire movie. I mean, he starts the movie out conning lawmen by basically being a bounty hunter, but then he saves the Tuco, the guy who's getting hanged, and then brings him back and then catches him again and gets more money for it. So
Nice.
so he's not really a good guy, but I think really what made me decide this movie was my favorite Western is there's the climactic scene is one of the just like most memorable scenes to me. Like it's a scene that's so engraved in my memory that it's a memory it's a scene that I could just sit down and just watch, like this 10-minute scene when they finally get to this graveyard where they think the treasure's at, and all three characters go to the center and they have their like classic standoff where they're all staring at each other, and it's really long, and it's got this really great song by Ennio Morricone, the composer for like all these Sergio Leone films. He has such an iconic style. And he has a song I think it's called Ecstasy and Gold. And it's just this really great song that just builds up the tension and builds up this confrontation between these two characters that's been building for like 2 hours. And thus I'm really curious about the set that they're out at. If it's a real place in Italy, because it's this really huge sort of like circular graveyard that's got like these concentric circles of graves going out, and then like one smaller circle at the middle where they all go to. And it's just like this super dramatic, just really fascinating set. It looks so cool, and it's so dramatic having all these graves lined up, leading down and like spiraling down into the center confrontation. And just, I mean, another thing you could say about The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is it's got that theme, the wah 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 wah. Everybody knows that fucking theme,
Yes.
but I don't know how. Like, everyone knows that theme, but it's like you don't usually just like go around casually hearing The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly theme everywhere, but everyone knows what it is and where it's from, and it's so weird to me because like it's not like a ton of people have seen The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, especially like, you know, growing up, like going through like high school. Everyone knew what that was, but I have no idea where that came from because nobody had seen The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
That's a good point, because for me, the reason I haven't seen it is it's not a hard movie to get your hands on, but it's not an easy one either.
Yeah, it's not like it's not one where it's like it just has its own like
$5 DVD.
Yeah, it's not one of those. You basically have to get into the box set
and spend some good money on it, and it's not on TV all that often or anything, so it's like, yeah, but I was saying that is that I haven't seen it, but I know a lot of, not just the songs you're talking about, but the imagery too.
Yeah.
Like, you're describing that graveyard, I've seen pictures of that. I've seen, like, frames from this movie, and, you know, we've studied parts of it in film school and stuff, so.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things that also, what was hard is The Searchers does something similar where, I think The Searchers shot in Utah, which is kind of weird because I think it's supposed to be in Texas, it's really clearly Utah, and it's got like the same thing where it's got really dramatic, just like flat landscapes, and you can just see forever. But there's just something about The Good, the Bad, the Ugly. It's got like, it's sort of, because it's Italian, and a lot of the actors aren't actually speaking in English and are dubbed over, it's just got this like style and flavor to it that it's just so infectious. It's kind of got a sort of B-movie thing going for it that I just love, and you can't. It just like absorbs you into the world that these characters inhabit. It's such a fascinating movie, and so I really would encourage everyone to go out. And basically, the box set that I have, I believe it's called the Clint Eastwood Western Collection or just the Clint Eastwood Collection, that has all three of his Sergio Leone movies, and then also whatever that other, like Kingdom High. So basically, that I think that's what it's called.
I would also, I can point out, I know they recently, maybe last year or 2 years ago, did the Dollars Trilogy on Blu-ray. So if you're a Blu-ray person, you want those like that.
I don't have a Blu-ray player, so that's why all my things are DVDs.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying, if you have it and you want it, I know that's out there, and Amazon occasionally does their like gold box deal for $20, and I keep missing it and being mad at myself because I want to get it and just sit down and watch all the movies. But
yeah, I mean, this would probably be a really good movie to watch in Blu-ray too, because so much about it is very visual.
Yep. Well, it's outside scenes on Blu-ray, like of nature and of the Western and of landscapes.
The landscape's just so beautiful. It's it's such a beautiful movie to watch, but everything that is going on is so violent and just like despicable and hateful. What these characters do to each other and like what's going on in the background. It's like the landscape's just so magnificent. It's a really interesting movie, and I really encourage everyone to watch it.
Yep. Okay. So
especially you, Jonathan.
I know. we'll watch it. Maybe someday we'll do a Dollars Trilogy podcast or something.
That'd actually be kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I actually have kind of a funny story about like where I had watched all three of them right in a row, and then we rented at the time, Kick-Ass, that superhero movie that came out a few years ago. And there's a scene in Kick-Ass where Hit Girl, it's kind of like the Matrix scene where Hit Girl goes into like the lobby of this building and starts like killing people. That scene uses the fucking theme from For a Few Dollars More, which I just like watched the other day. It's just like,
that's awesome.
What the hell? That's like, that came out of nowhere. It's like, I thought I was hallucinating for a second because that's another thing I can't stress enough. Even just listening to the themes from all of those movies with Ennio Morricone, the themes to those movies are so good. It really added a lot to the scene in Kick-Ass. So,
that's awesome.
Kick-Ass is also a pretty good movie. You should watch that too.
Fun movie. Speaking of fun, and speaking of Harrison Ford, which we were a little bit ago,
Harrison Ford, not in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
No, but this is my number 8 movie. It's another Harrison Ford movie, but not just another one. This is the Harrison Ford movie. This is Raiders of the Lost fucking Ark. The word "fucking" is not in the title, but this movie is so...
It is like an implied fucking
in
the title.
It is so awesome. And this is sort of where we're entering the point on this list where I've got like a 8-way tie for number 2 or something, because I love this movie so much, and there have been various points where I felt it's like near the top of my list or something, and it's just I can watch it over and over again, and I really, really love it. And it's hard to even describe all the ways it works. I guess the most basic way is Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, to a lesser extent, because he's the producer on the movie, have such a good understanding of the language of adventure movies and of adventure serials. And obviously Steven Spielberg of action directing. And Harrison Ford creates such an instantly iconic character who's a little different than anything he'd ever played. And
He's like a little more Harrison Ford than any other Harrison Ford character.
Absolutely. And so I think you combine all that together, and Raiders of the Lost Ark, just from moment one to the end, feels like everything is just in perfect harmony to make the most fun, sort of just whimsical adventure. I guess not whimsical, but it's sort of lighthearted and really fun adventure movie. This is probably, I don't know if you would classify this as an action or an adventure movie, but it's got a lot of action in it. So it's probably my favorite straight action sort of.
Yeah, I would call it more adventure movie than an action movie, but that's
but in that sort of kind of genre, it's probably easily my favorite. And again, it's sort of like Star Wars. It's so iconic and people know it so well. I don't quite know what to say about it, but I guess you have to start with, again, the characters and Indiana Jones. I've always been more of an Indiana Jones person than a Star Wars person, even though I feel like the sequels to Indiana Jones are weaker than the sequels to at least the original trilogy, Star Wars. Yeah. But I love the character Indiana Jones so much. And again, it is Harrison Ford given free rein to be as Harrison Ford as he wants to be. Mm-hmm. He's not as hard-edged as Han Solo, and I think it feels a little more natural for him as an actor, probably, because it seems like a little more like who he is as a person. Yeah. As someone who is a very earnest individual who really cares about their work. And for Indiana Jones, it's archaeology and stuff. And I love that aspect of the character, that he's a genius archaeologist. He's a great professor.
Well, he's a terrible fucking archaeologist.
Okay.
He's like the worst archaeologist ever of all time.
Okay, in the Indiana Jones
Like, if
universe,
you go up and say to an actual archaeologist, like, man, Indiana Jones is like a genius archaeologist. He's like, he's like the Einstein of archaeology. They will fucking punch you in the face with a dragon bone.
I'm saying in the world of Indiana Jones, he's, in the context of the movie, but then, he's this great action hero with this thirst for adventure, and it's just sort of, there's something that I think sort of plays to, like, my childlike film sensibilities, where I just love to sort of, like, throw myself into a movie and imagine myself as being like this character's friend or being on this character's adventures.
So you're the reason that superhero comics made sidekicks. That's exactly they made like Robin so that the little kids reading comic books would be like, I'm with Batman too.
But do you know what I mean? Like, just sort of that.
See, wait, no, you wanted to be fucking Short Round.
No, that's not what I meant.
So when you were like playing Temple of Doom, you're like, yes, my dream of seeing a character going around following him and going, Dr. Jones, Dr. Jones, it's finally come true.
I kind of like Short Round. But
I like Short Round too. I really like Temple of Doom. People give it shit, but I like that movie.
No, that's a fun movie.
Yeah.
It's a fucked up movie. That's what's wonderful about it.
Kalima.
Yeah. Hey, at least I'm not Sheila Booth in this scenario. We can talk about that a little bit.
Not yet.
Sorry.
Not yet.
Okay. But yeah, I think... So yeah, I love the character. Harrison Ford is so confident in the role, and he has so much fun with it. I think that's the thing, the key to it, is everyone in the movie, not just him, but obviously the woman playing Marion Ravenwood, and the guys, all the villainous characters. They just have so much...
One Nazi guy who's like, he's kind of like the main Nazi villain. He always wears he's got like the black Gestapo uniform, like the black gloves on. That dude is fucking creepy. I don't know who he is. Like, I don't know if I've seen any other movies with him in it. He is a creepy dude.
I know. I remember I saw him in another movie one other time. I don't even remember what it was, but I was immediately creeped out, and I didn't recognize him at first, but there was like a primal thing in my head where I'm like...
Fraulein.
Yeah. It's great. But everyone has it dialed up to 11, and
Yeah.
I love that sort of over-the-top acting. And it really is sort of funny. Harrison Ford is the most grounded performer in the movie. Everyone else is way over the top, and that's why... he can be sort of the sarcastic onlooker in this. Yeah. And I think the moment that sort of sums up what I love about the tone of the movie is the big chase it's somewhere in Cairo.
I think it's like Tunisia. Oh,
yeah, it's the marketplaces in Cairo.
Yeah.
And he's trying to get Marion back, and there's the guy with the sword.
Everyone knows the scene. Yeah.
And he's swirling the sword, and he's saying, he's talking big about how he's going to fight Indy. And Harrison Ford just has this, like, really angry, he's like, no.
And he like kind of rolls his eyes, he pulls his 6-shooter out and just shoots him right in the chest, and just walks away. It's a great scene.
And that's what I love about Indiana Jones, is that he exists in this world, but he can navigate it because he's a little detached from how over-the-top everything else is. So, and it does so many things well. It does this sweeping sort of adventure epic well, where they're going to all these different locations, and he gets to be the detective and sort of find out, use sort of archaeological clues to figure out where to go and find the Ark of the Covenant. And then there's the big action scenes. And Steven Spielberg I think Steven Spielberg, because he generally doesn't do big action movies, is sort of underrated as an action director.
Yeah.
But I will say this, I think Raiders of the Lost Ark has my favorite series of action scenes in any movie. They're just all so good, and Spielberg has this talent for drawing out an action scene as long as it will go and just ratcheting up the tension over and over again until it becomes both unbearable and then really, really exciting when they finally, when he wins. I think probably the iconic scene is the chase through the desert after they find the Ark of the Covenant. And when you think about how many steps there are in that action sequence, there's a lot. It starts with the plane in the dig site, and he's just fighting the big guy, and Marion's in the turret, but then she moves away, and then the gas starts coming out, and the plane blows up, and the guy gets chopped up in the propeller, and then Indy goes after the truck, and he gets on the truck, and he's under the truck, and the truck, falls over, and, it's all these different things. And it just keeps going and going, and so by the time he finally wins, and he gets the Ark, and they play, and John Williams' Indiana Jones theme, the Raiders March, comes up, it's just yeah! And you're, cheering in the middle of the movie.
Yeah.
And if you've ever seen this movie projected on a theater screen, a big theater screen, it is awe-inspiring. You were talking about the visuals of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it's a little different, obviously, but this movie has just such great cinematography, and it's so big, and I think that's what I would say about it, is it just feels big in every shot.
Yeah.
And, again, it's also one where the bigger the screen you're watching it on, for some reason the effects become more and more seamless. The special effects in this movie, it's not the same like level of effects as Star Wars because it's not sci-fi, but there's a lot of them.
Yeah, but like the practical effects are so well done, so seamless. Yeah.
And I think one of the things that makes me love Indiana Jones so much is that I was really lucky. The first time I saw this movie was actually on one of the biggest screens in Colorado at the Regal Continental. They were doing this series of old movies, and they did the whole Indiana Jones trilogy in 3 weeks, and that's how I saw them for the first time.
That's cool.
And like that's so much better than seeing it on DVD for the first time because you have that point of reference. And it looked so great, and like the sound and everything. It's just a great experience. So you've got the action, you've got the adventure elements. It can be a sweeping romantic story, like this relationship between Indiana and Marion Ravenwood is just it's every great romantic cliche of this genre put into one and executed perfectly. Where he's the gruff standoffish guy, and she they have this. It's kind of the Casablanca thing actually. Yeah. It's sort of the Ingrid Bergman Humphrey Bogart thing. But really done well and in this adventure context. And there's the great scene. Harrison Ford can do these romantic moments where it seems like he doesn't give a shit so well. I'm thinking of the, I love you, I know scene in Empire Strikes Back. But in this one, it's where he says, it hurts. And she kisses the place where it hurts. And she says, where else? And he says, here and here. And he's getting sort of angrier as he does it. And I love all that. And
it's not the age, it's the mileage.
Oh, great line. And it's also kind of funny, the love theme in Raiders of the Lost Ark, the first couple of notes are the exact same as the Leia and Han theme in Star Wars. And then it goes off in a different direction, but it starts the same way, which is kind of funny. I don't know if you've ever noticed that.
No, that's a very specific bit of trivia there. Now you know.
Yes. And I also sort of love the audacity of how Raiders ends, which is where the characters are fucked. And they're tied up. These demon spirits are about to come out. They've lost. They've lost this battle that they've been waging for 2 hours in movie time. And then it's just because basically they've been the good guys and Indy is smart enough to not be sort of the egotist in this situation that everyone else is killed and they live. And it is sort of this great ending that goes in a direction you don't expect. Even though the movie does follow these serialized cliches, it does go off in this different direction at the end. And then, of course, has the great ending of Top Men and the warehouse.
Can I say that I'm pretty sure that the very end, like the last scene in Raiders where they're like pushing the crate through that big warehouse, I'm pretty sure that's what inspired the entirety of the X-Files show. Like the tone in that scene is what made the X-Files, which is like it might be my favorite TV show up there with Doctor Who. It's like that's one of the things you didn't really touch on when you were talking about
the fantasy,
Raiders.
Sci-fi.
Yeah, it's the fantasy and like the mystery element to it, where because they are trying to find the Ark of the Covenant. There's like this mythical artifact, and they have like the whole thing, the famous scene where Indiana like sticks like the staff in the ground and like the moon shines through. It's got this great, and what's been like carried on mostly and like copied in video games all over the place. That sort of adventure with mild fantasy elements attached to it. That's like where it's mostly a straight world, like where it's like it's just like basic, like normal action adventure world. But then you find out, well, there's something else going on here. Like this is like a sort of like mythical thing they're finding.
Yeah. And Temple of Doom, actually, if we want to talk about the sequels a little bit, which we probably should.
Yeah.
Temple of Doom pushes much heavier on the fantasy elements, and I think that's what I like about it, because I do like how Indy reacts to these things. It's fascinating to watch him up against this stuff he either doesn't believe in, or he has trouble believing in.
Yeah.
I think Temple of Doom is sort of a fascinating mess of a movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's so weirdly dark compared to where Raiders is so lighthearted.
Well, and 3 and 4. And,
where it's like those movies are so lighthearted and happy and just adventurous, and then you get like fucking bald, crazy Indian dude like pulling a dude's heart out, like worshiping an evil god.
And there's like,
there's like the child slavery thing.
There's the child slavery. There's the voodoo where Indy is trying to fight the guy on. It's a great action sequence, but Indy is being like tortured. And if you know the like behind the scenes where Harrison Ford had debilitating back problems during that movie,
I didn't know that.
It adds something more to it. Yeah, they had to stop shooting for 6 weeks because he had to go get surgery on his back. And the guy is putting pins in his back. Like, did they tempt fate? What happened?
It's like Harrison Ford really pissed off Spielberg the other day. He was like, Harrison, we have a rewrite of the script. Here he goes, like, needles in my back. What the fuck, are you trying to kill me?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of funny. I think even Spielberg has like disowned Temple of Doom and says he doesn't like it, but I do like it is fascinating to me because I don't know how anyone let them go in that direction as far as they did, but they did, and I think it's one of the most fascinating moments in blockbuster filmmaking, and an entertaining one too. It's good.
Yeah, I really like Temple of Doom. I also, I mean, one action scene in Temple of Doom that always sticks out in my head is the minecart chase.
Yeah.
It's so cool.
I also want to say I love the way Temple of Doom opens. It's like my favorite opening to an Indiana Jones
where
film.
it's like kind of like this weird, almost like gangster movie thing.
Yeah, they're in the cabaret club,
Yeah.
and there's the big song, and Indy is sort of this suave spy in that.
He's got like a white suit on.
Yeah, it's great. And then, of course, it's crazy that the series of steps that get them to Temple of Doom, he's not looking for anything.
Yeah.
They're just trying to escape.
That's right, because they just like kind of end up there.
Yeah. They get in the plane with Short Round and Kate Capshaw, I don't remember her, or Willie is her name. And she's screaming a bunch, and then they have to jump out in the boat, which, that is way more unrealistic than the nuke scene.
The fucking life raft thing? Yeah,
that's way worse than nuking the fridge. I mean, there's no way they would live through that. Like, they would be, like, in pieces. But they live somehow, and then they get down the river, and then they're walking through the forest, and there's the scene with the elephant, and then they meet all the Indian people, and then they get into the temple, and there's a bunch of stereotypes, and they have to eat the monkey brains, and then Kate Capshaw hits, like, the trap door, and they get into the Temple of Doom. It's
just like, I completely forgot there's all this... They just completely stumble upon this crazy, like, occult, evil, god-worshipping thing.
Yep. It's great. And that's what I love about it, is it's surreal. Like, even when you're watching it, and if you've watched it like 10 times, you don't quite believe you're watching it.
Yeah.
It's like the most surreal movie.
Dr. Jones.
And I do like Short Round. I think Short Round has a good heart, and he wants to help, and I think that makes up for, any of his annoyances that people perceive.
Yeah, I wish if they'd made another Indiana Jones movie, it would be like Short Round comes back.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like he does the same, where it's like, he's like the new Indiana Jones. It's like Robin turning into Nightwing.
Yeah, that'd
like,
be cool.
I think that they should do that. Short Round.
See what that actor's up to?
Yeah.
He'd be like 20, 30 now, probably. That was an original plan for Kingdom of the Crystal Skull before they got Shia LaBeouf.
Yeah, well.
That was a...
That's what happens when you get a little bit of LaBeouf in here.
Really quickly, I want to ask you, what do you think of Last Crusade? I really like that one.
I really like Last Crusade, too.
Yeah.
Doesn't everyone really like Last Crusade?
So. Yeah. I think putting Harrison Ford and Sean Connery together, brilliant.
Awesome. Sean Connery is the best part of that movie.
Yeah.
What makes that movie for me, really.
Yeah. And it's the most lighthearted of the three, probably. But it's got another one of those legendary Spielberg action scenes, which is the tank chase.
God, the tank chase is so
I don't know.
Cool.
I have no idea how they pulled that off, but it's so great.
And I just love the whole thing with the Holy Grail and like the knight that's there, and the dude like drinks the cup, he's just like, "You chose pool." It's like, I just love the way that guy says that line. That's one of those lines that's just like in my head all the time, and I want to just say that so much in my daily life.
Yes, and it's another one of those out of the blue, really gruesome Indiana Jones moments.
Like, it's so happy and lighthearted. And the dude drinks the wrong cup and he like just disintegrates. It's like, Jesus Christ. And the dude doesn't even care. He's like, "You chose poorly."
And Indy, it's Harrison Ford reacting to this crazy shit and just being so freaked out by it. And then I think you and I are pretty much in agreement on Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, where we respect it and have fun with it in certain ways. Yeah. We don't hate it the way other people do.
Yeah, it's obviously not the best Indiana Jones movie. It's the worst out of all of them, but it's like people have a thing with it
that I don't get.
Yeah, it's not that. It's kind of like with Spider-Man 3, where it's like, Spider-Man 3 is not that good of a movie, but it's not like this is a terrible movie.
And there's stuff
some disappointing stuff in it.
And there's stuff I really do like about Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, namely, it gave us Harrison Ford playing Indy again, and he did not miss a beat. He's totally Indiana Jones, and it's really fun to watch him again. My main complaint with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull actually isn't any story stuff, it's their use of CGI. I don't think
that was...
There's way too much.
There's another thing that I like. I don't think they executed it particularly well, but I like the fact that they did, where it's like set in the 50s, and they did communists as the villains, and then also has sort of a 50s B-movie plot with like the alien thing. I like the idea of the aliens having it being set in the 50s and going for that style, having it evolve with the B-movie thing. They didn't execute the alien part of it right.
No.
Like, it's a good idea, but it should have been done a lot cheesier than it was. Like, they treated the alien thing so seriously.
Well, and there's the stupid line where John Hurt has to say, "No, they're from the space between spaces."
It's like, what the fuck? What does that mean?
But going back to
they're in like the 2.5th dimension. Like,
but going back to Raiders of the Lost Ark, it's a great, great movie. if you've probably seen it. If you haven't, it's on DVD in a couple different configurations. I have the original box set. And these are some of the best looking DVDs I've ever had. Like, I'm excited for these to come out on Blu-ray. I think they come out later this year. But I've never needed the high def version because they look really good on DVD. They look practically high def. It's such a good transfer, and it is again a very visual movie. So you can really see the hoses playing snakes in the snake pit scene. So great movie. Anything else to say about it?
It's a really good movie.
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
We spent enough time on that. It's time for your number 7.
My number 7 is a movie that some people might have heard of, The Godfather.
Okay, I think how we're going to do this. The Godfather is also on my list. I don't want to spoil
Spoilers. Jesus.
Well, I think we have to say that at some point.
Okay.
It's on my list. Well, I'll probably do my piece on it later. But Sean, why don't you talk about what you love about The Godfather?
The Godfather is. Actually, it's a pretty long time ago now, but there was a certain point where I had decided that I wanted to start watching the classic movies that everyone talks about and that everyone references. It's kind of like Casablanca, where it's everything about it, mostly from Looney Tunes cartoons, because they make so many references and jokes.
Carrot Blanca?
Yeah. It's you just see so many references to these movies, and they're so iconic in pop culture that I wanted to start going through and watching them. And the first ones I had decided on were the Godfather trilogy. And so for me, they kind of represent a special point for me, where it was the first movie that I had seen that was that hugely dramatic and had so much weight to it. And just the style of the Godfather is so interesting and just involving and compelling in so many ways that it just opened the door for me for a lot of the movies later on in this list. That it just allowed me to understand movies as a much deeper art form. And and a lot of people, I had a hard time picking between The Godfather and The Godfather Part 2, because they're both really, really good movies. But there's something about the journey of Michael Corleone across The Godfather, turning from the kind-hearted war veteran that he is at the beginning of the movie to becoming the mob boss at the end, and all that journey through going through to Sicily and all that stuff is so interesting and compelling. It's one of the most interesting character arcs I've seen in any movie.
I like Godfather 1 much more than 2. It's not a contest for me, even though I think 2 is a great movie. For exactly the same reasons you're saying, and it was the same thing for me, where it was an eye-opening movie experience. Yeah. But anyway, go on.
Yeah, everyone knows why the movie's so good. It's weird that it's not even really a gangster movie or a mobster movie. It's so much and that's just kind of what you think when you hear about it. But it's so much more than that. It goes so far beyond just being about the Italian mob in New York.
Well, I think it's the quintessential American movie classic, and I think because it's a quintessential American story.
Yeah,
and it's about immigrants, and it's about capitalism, and it's about the building of family and what that means in an American context. And
and all the sort of the because all these people, the protagonists of the movie, do terrible, terrible things. They're not good people, and the character arc of Michael Corleone is so tragic, but you understand why everyone's doing what they're doing. You understand how important it's there's a sense of honor and family and tradition, and that sticking up for the people who are close to you.
Yeah.
That is so important, but they take it, the characters take it up to a level that's too far, and it's and they go to this really dark place with it, but they're in this really kind of dark world where there's a lot of other people like that trying to get into the drug market and all that kind of stuff. And
I think Coppola at the time was very much commenting on what he perceived as sort of how the American journey and how the American dream progresses, which is more of a regression. And that, Vito Corleone comes over, and you have to sort of bring in part 2 a little bit to know this. But to build his empire, he's a good man, and he helps other people. And he does some bad things.
Yeah.
But he, of every character we see in any of the Godfather movies, is probably the most honorable. And he tries
especially among the mobsters.
Yeah.
He's the best guy among bad people.
And he wanted to do this mostly so he could build a better life for his family. And there's my favorite scene, not just in The Godfather, but maybe in any movie, is Vito and Michael's last conversation in the garden.
Yeah.
And it's Vito giving him some instructions and then finally opening up. And Marlon Brando is so brilliant in this moment. And he says, I never wanted this for you. And and it's sort of, that's the theme of the movie, is that the American dream is that you build something so your kids can have something better. And yet, The Godfather shows that maybe the truth about America is that you sort of create a hole for yourself and your family and your lineage. And Michael, because Michael is Vito's son and he has many of Vito's qualities, but without some of the... But he's grown up in this world. He doesn't know something else. Yeah. And so Michael is like the ultimate end, Vito to the nth degree realization of this world. And he becomes ruthless and he becomes worse than his father, and he falls into exactly what his father never wanted. And that, to me, plays so powerfully. And one of my favorite lines is when he says, I never wanted this for you. And Michael ends the conversation by saying, we'll get there, Pop. We'll get there. And that's what the whole Godfather trilogy is about. Even in its bad moments in the third one, is getting there. And that journey that is probably never going to be fulfilled. Yeah. And there's that sadness to it. So, yeah. Anyway. But do you want to talk about some of your favorite characters and stuff in it?
I mean, that's also like all of them. I mean, there's Sonny, there's Fredo, like all of the members of the Corleone. I really have a soft spot in my heart for Sonny. I really love that character.
James Caan is awesome.
Yeah, James Caan is just so good in that role. I mean, God, he dies kind of pretty early in the movie.
He does.
I mean, it's a really long movie, but yeah, he's just such an interesting character, and that's such a really sad scene when he gets executed like that. It's just the movie is just so. Like, there's no other movie that I can, like, call it's a drama, seriously. Like, this is the only movie that's like, this is a drama. Yeah. This, like, that's what this movie is. And most movies that purport themselves to be dramas are usually, I find them to be kind of really manufactured in a weird way. Like, it's, like, all of a sudden it's, like, pseudo-philosophical, and it's just kind of stupid. But The Godfather is, like...
I agree.
Really, it's like, it's the drama. Well, it's a dramatic movie.
Here's what I was going to say about Sonny is...
Santino Corleone.
Santino is... There's so many... This is something that all the characters do, is where they can be very bad people, but you like them because they give you reasons to respect them as individuals. And with Sonny, it's that even though he's the most hot-headed member of the family and everything, he also cares about his family so deeply.
He cares so... Yeah, it's like, this is the thing that's like, they all care about each other so deeply.
Yeah. But that's part of it, though, is that Sonny, in a sense, and this is an implication I've always loved to think about, is that he would have been a worse Don than Michael in a practical sense of what he would have done for the family. Mm-hmm. But he would have been a better Don in that he would have kept that family together. Yeah. He would not have let other people die or done what Michael does in the end of Part 2, which would be killing his family. Yeah. So there's those things to explore, and I cannot overstate how good Marlon Brando is.
Seriously.
He's only in probably like 30 minutes total of the movie, too. He's not in much of it, because he's out for the middle hour because he's in the hospital, but he leaves such a deep impression, you always feel his presence. Like when someone says the word Vito, it's like you just feel this like shiver down your spine because you've seen this performance.
And then also, I mean...
Al Pacino.
Al Pacino, and... I don't know, like, what happened to Al Pacino. At some point, Al Pacino turned into the craziest fucking actor in the world. Yes. Where, I mean, and I love crazy Al Pacino, too. Where he just gives, like, the most over-the-top performance where he's just yelling and screaming. There's one movie, Michael Mann's, I think it's just called Heat, where it's him and Robert De Niro. Al Pacino's performance in that movie is so amazing. It's like, he just shouts every other line, and it's so incredible. But in this, it's like he's so, like, kind of laid back and subdued and very natural.
It's a great performance.
Yeah, it's a really great performance, and he really sells what's a really difficult character arc. Where it's hard to start with Michael being this really likable person who's, you can understand, is like, he's a nice guy, he doesn't want to hurt people, and then turning him into this, like, criminal mastermind by the end of the movie. That's a really difficult character arc to pull off, and Al Pacino does it seamlessly.
Yeah, it's great. But I mean, I love all the actors and the characters and the little pieces of it, and I guess I'll talk more about it when we get to my spot on the list. But do you have anything else you want to say about The Godfather for now?
It's an awesome, awesome movie. I think everyone knows that by now, but it's like it's definitely deserving of its place in cinema history.
Do we want to mention the sequels now or later?
We'll talk about them later.
Okay, that's probably good. So that was your number 7, right?
Number 7.
My number 7.
Number 7.
My number 7 is the final piece of the Harrison Ford trifecta. as I like to call it. This is Blade Runner from 1982, Ridley Scott's sci-fi epic. And I just watched Blade Runner again the other day to prepare for this. And I guess what I would say about Blade Runner, where I would start with it, is going back to the conversation Sean and I started with the Star Wars discussion, which was, Sean said, Star Wars to him suggests a larger universe so well. That's why I love Blade Runner, because it's such an immaculately designed movie. Mm-hmm. And every frame of it doesn't feel like anything we would find in our world, but it feels like a natural extension of our world, 50, 100 years in the future. Yeah. I mean, obviously, the future they said is not probably far enough, but it was made in 1982, so that happens. 2001 isn't far enough, so whatever, But Blade Runner, that's what I love about it. And I think the difference, why this suggests a larger universe to me than Star Wars, is because Star Wars tells the biggest story you could in that universe, which is the rebellion versus the Empire. Mm-hmm. That's the biggest thing going on in the Star Wars universe, probably. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. Yes.
Blade Runner is...
I mean, I know that, because I know what else is going on in the Star Wars universe. Yeah,
right.
Blade Runner is pretty big.
Blade Runner is telling one of the smallest stories in its own universe. There are probably much, much bigger things going on.
Yeah.
And yet we get the story of this down-on-his-luck detective cop, a Blade Runner named Rick Deckard, who's Harrison Ford, and he's tasked with taking out 4 replicants who are androids who have gone rogue. It's not even a huge deal. They're not a huge threat to society. Mm-hmm. It's just he's a bounty hunter. He's been given this mission, and he executes it. It's not a big story in this universe, and that's why it suggests so much, is because you get this sense of how these people live in this future, and it's such a well-thought-out future, and each character is so well just written and thought out and three-dimensional, and the performances are so amazing in every side of this movie. Mm-hmm. And so Blade Runner, from the first time I saw it, just captured my imagination to a degree that few other movies ever have. And I think, Sean, you probably remember when I first saw Blade Runner, and I didn't shut up about it, probably, for like a couple months.
Yeah.
I was like incessant about Blade Runner. I really was just invested in this movie. And if you have the 5-disc Blu-ray or DVD set, you get really caught up in it, because there's not only 5 versions of the movie to explore, there's a 3-hour documentary that's a great movie in its own right, because Blade Runner has such a fascinating production history. And then there's like an hour of deleted scenes that are cut together as its own movie, and there's another 4 hours of documentary. It's nuts, and like you can just go crazy with Blade Runner, and that's what I love about it. And I've joked to Sean before that we could do a whole podcast just about Blade Runner, and after watching the movie again, I think I probably could draw enough material on that, just going from character to character, and just imagining what are these people's histories and everything, because my favorite thing about sort of the pacing and style of Blade Runner is that they don't spell anything out for you. And that's the thing. I mean, we're going to have to get into this at some point. The theatrical cut of Blade Runner is not the version of Blade Runner I love. I'm talking about either the director's cut from 1991 or the final cut from 2007, where they removed the narration, they edited it down by about 5 minutes and got rid of the happy ending.
This is a stupid fucking happy ending.
Yeah, because what I love about Blade Runner in its pure, true form is that it doesn't spell anything out for you. You just observe these characters in this universe, and you sort of make conclusions about who they are and what they represent. And I made a bunch of notes here, and I think we should probably start character-wise with Harrison Ford. And I guess Rick Deckard is Harrison Ford's most fascinating character to me, and it's a really brilliant performance, where I sort of see him, and I think everyone's interpretation on who Rick Deckard is could vary, and obviously we'll get into the replicant discussion in a minute. But to me, he's just a man who, I get a sense that if he wanted to, he could leave Earth. He could get off and go to one of the nice off-world colonies, because we only see the grimy streets of L.A. on Earth, but we know people live in nice areas off-world. That's something they say over a couple of times. But Rick Deckard has chosen to stay here. He's chosen to live the life of this Blade Runner. And he's chosen, more importantly, to live this sort of life of pain. And there's this great scene after he kills Zora and after Rachel kills Leon, who are 2 of the replicants. He comes back home with Rachel, and he has this sort of almost process of getting rid of the blood out of his mouth and sort of feeling for injuries. And you see that he's not only used to this, it's sort of like an automatic response. It's sort of the pain that's part of him. And that's sort of his arc in the movie, is getting to a place in his life where he wants more for himself. And I love that arc, and it's what Roy Batty teaches him by beating the ever-living shit out of him during the most brutal fight scene imaginable in the last half hour of the movie. and it's sort of it's a arc for him about learning why he should live life, or what there is something to live for, and that's obviously part of that is Rachel, the replicant he falls in love with. But and I think it's very much symbolized by the ending, and I want to talk about the final shot because that's how I fell in love with Blade Runner. It's a lot like Big Lebowski to me. The first time you watch it, it's sort of hard to crack. It's so dense. You have to watch it a second time. And I remember I got it from Netflix because I'd been hearing about it. I was sort of on that same kick you were talking about of watching classic movies.
Yeah.
And so I got it on the old DVD release that wasn't even in like anamorphic widescreen. It looked terrible. And I was watching it, and I was sort of fascinated by the visuals, but I didn't know what to make of it. And then you get to the ending, and he sees the little unicorn that Edward James Olmos has left for him. In his wonderfully crazy performance. And he sees the little unicorn, and then it has my favorite Harrison Ford moment of all time, where he looks at it, and he has this little look of resolve, where he sort of there's a sad look in his eyes, and he sort of nods and crumples it up and gets up, and now he's very much resolved, and he gets into the elevator, and it shuts, and the Vangelis music comes in. One of my favorite movie endings of all time. And everyone likes to talk about how that implies he's a replicant. To me, that's completely out. That's not that's not important. That's irrelevant, whether he's a replicant or not. The point of the ending is the ambiguity. The point of the ending is that he could be. Anyone in this world could be a replicant, like all these other people. And now that he's had this experience with them, and he's gotten to know these replicants through Rachel and Roy Batty and some of the others so in depth, the suggestion and the reminder that any day he could just shut down because he could have a 4-year lifespan, it hits him, and it's the moment where his character arc is fulfilled, because I think that look of resolve he has is that I need to change my ways, or I need to sort of value life more, and that's his arc. And that's what I love about Blade Runner, is I think your interpretation of that could very well differ, and if it...
That's actually basically the same way I feel about it. That it's, I mean, he could be a replicant, he could not. It's like, it doesn't, I agree, this doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
The important is that, like, he realizes that...
Yeah.
He realizes that he needs to kind of like make himself happy. He needs to do something more. It's like, it doesn't matter whether or not he's a replicant. He has to live his life now.
Yes, and that's what Roy was trying to do, and that's the whole thing with that. And so what I'm saying here is that, that's all. None of that is spelled out for you, but Sean and I both came to these conclusions, and that's what's meaningful to me about it, is you can really dive into it and explore the movie that way. And I think that probably leads into discussion of all the other characters. There's so many good ones. And outside of Harrison Ford, it's a bunch of actors who have never really been famous or acclaimed in other areas. And I don't know what it was that Ridley Scott did, but he got really legendary performances out of some of these people. And the main one, obviously, is Rutger Hauer as Roy Batty.
Jesus.
That is one of the great sci-fi characters of all time. And watching it again, he also has very little screen time. He's in like 4 scenes.
He's mostly only in the end of the movie.
Yeah, but there's such powerful scenes, and he suggests this character who has lived such a larger life. And it's just a really powerful arc. And there's one scene, actually, in the deleted scenes I'm sad they left out, that sort of defines his performance to me, which is when he's going down the elevator after killing Tyrell near the end of the movie. And he hears the computer voice talking to him, and he looks up and he says, "Mommy?" in this really vulnerable... Have you seen that scene?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have the box set.
In this really vulnerable, like, little childish voice. And I think that's what makes this character powerful, is he is so... he's a powerful physical presence. He's very smart. He's very calculating, but he's also vulnerable at heart.
Yeah.
And sort of in that last scene where he's fighting Deckard and Roy and Rutger Hauer is given license to go as far as he can with that character, pushing the nail through his hand and singing and like giving these speeches. And it's just, you see all the little sides of this character, and it's really brilliant. You used to think the same thing about Roy Batty?
Yeah, I mean, it's just... I mean, like, especially the scene, everyone knows the scene, like, where he gives his speech right before he dies.
Yes.
It's just so amazing.
And Rutger Hauer improvised that.
Yeah, I mean, especially, the most iconic part of it is the very end where he says, all those moments will be lost in time, like tears in rain.
And that's the theme of the movie to me.
Yeah, and it's like, and he came up with that last line on the set, like the day they're going to shoot. It's like, Jesus, that's because it's just so perfect.
And it's also, that's a famous speech, but it's only like 3 lines long.
Yeah.
And I guess in the script it was written as a like half-page monologue. But it's just a brilliant moment, beautiful moment. Again, Harrison Ford's reaction to all that going on is great. But I love all the other characters too. Daryl Hannah as the sort of the pleasure model who has all the white makeup.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really fascinating performance to me too. And Daryl Hannah, she's really good in Kill Bill, but I don't know much of her work outside of that. She's sort of been sort of a B movie or less actress. But that's really interesting performance and sort of her relationship with Roy. One of my favorite characters is J.F. Sebastian. I don't know the guy who plays him, but he's the character who befriends Roy and then the Daryl Hannah's character. And that's a great character that sort of suggests, again, this universe of these people who are so sad living in this world where he can't find human connection. He's dying because of the atmosphere he's living in, and he just wants to make friends, and he's manipulated by that. There's all these little things where I feel like you could make a whole movie out of one character or one idea in Blade Runner, but it's all in one movie, and that's what I love about it. So I think there's probably a lot of other places we could go with this discussion, but probably don't want to go too further with it. Do you want to introduce listeners to the idea of the theatrical cut and where it went wrong?
Oh my god, yeah. That is one of the, because I have the same box that he has, only it's DVD instead of Blu-ray. And that is one of the most interesting things, is seeing all the different cuts, because there's like the work print version, the theatrical version.
The international version.
Yeah, the director's cut, and then the final cut, which the final cut's my favorite version.
It's the one you should watch.
Yeah. I mean, the director's cut is also really good, but
a little bit of history first. When it was being made, it was taken out of Ridley Scott's hands during post-production because the studio did not like it, for reasons you can understand. It's not a mainstream movie. I don't know how it got funded. It's ridiculous. But they decided it didn't make sense, so they had all this narration added, and we'll talk about that in a second. And then the international version was just what they had. It includes what they had to cut out to get an R rating in the United States. So it's like the scene where Roy pushes out Tyrell's eyes. It's really gory. Mm-hmm. But they're basically the same version. And then in the early 90s, the work print version, which was just an early rough cut Ridley Scott put together, was accidentally screened at a film festival, and that got people. And it didn't have the narration or the happy ending or anything, so it got people interested. That made the director's cut project, which Ridley Scott was not actually involved with. He just gave them notes and they did it. And then the final cut, why that's the best one, is it was the first time Ridley Scott was allowed to finish editing the movie. And it has a couple of enhancements, but not anything like Star Wars Special Editions enhancements. Yeah. But you talk about what the theatrical version did.
Well, the theatrical version has... I mean, I could kind of understand where they're going, because Blade Runner is a very film noir-esque type movie. It's like film noir sci-fi. And so they wanted to have Harrison Ford do narration to explain kind of what's going on. And it's so hard to watch, because Harrison Ford did not want to do the narration.
No.
He really didn't. He knew that it was a bad idea. He didn't want to do it. So he basically did it the worst you could possibly... it sounds like Harrison Ford, has no interest in what's going on. He's just kind of, mumbles out his lines. It's like the narration's just kind of stupid and clunky. It's in stupid places. They have it right after Rutger Hauer's speech.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah. I hate that part.
That's because it's such a beautiful moment, and then Harrison Ford's like...
No. It's even worse than that. It's the lines he has to say there. He says, I don't know why Roy didn't kill me.
Oh, yeah.
But it's well, he just gave a speech about it.
Yeah, it's just come on. It's just, it just kills the movie. The theatrical edition is really bad. And then... It's Blade Runner is a super dark movie. I mean, literally, it's really dark. The aesthetic is just really dark and gloomy and shadowy. And when in the ending of the movie, in the theatrical cut, it's everyone's dead. It's Harrison Ford's gone through so much stuff, but the ending of the movie, it's him and what's
Rachel.
the name? Yeah, and Rachel. They're in a car driving down a highway in this really bright, sunny, it's covered in grass and trees, and they're just driving off into the sunset. It's where the fuck did this ending come from? It literally looks nothing. It looks like it was from a completely different movie.
It was?
Yeah.
It was stock footage of mountains that they put in.
It's just, Jesus. It was so,
it's a mistake, and it's too bad.
But now, luckily, you can get your hands on several different versions. And
I think the cool thing about Blade Runner, though, is it's a masterpiece because it was sort of an accident all through production. All the things that went wrong made the movie better, ultimately. Not in the immediate aftermath of the theatrical cut, but by the time now you can own the Blu-ray with the good versions of the movie. It is amazing how it all came together. And you should watch the Dangerous Days documentary, which is on disc 2 of the DVD or Bluray set. It's fascinating how they put this together.
I just love how it's like all like the stuff about like Harrison Ford just seems so miserable when they're shooting that movie. He's just like I'm getting rained on constantly. It is fucking cold. I don't want to be here. It's like, yeah. But it's like, I think that actually, like, him being so miserable really adds something to the performance because the character seems so, like, just, like, depressed and, like, down on his luck.
Yeah. It's great. The other thing I think I need to mention, just in terms of, like, what one thing that makes this movie work and is essential is the score by Vangelis, which is an early... I mean, now we have a lot of these sort of techno scores. They've been sort of pioneered now by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross with the latest David Fincher movies. But this Vangelis score is sort of the precursor to those if you've seen The Social Network or Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and it's so good, and it adds so much to the atmosphere.
Yeah, it's such a classic sci-fi soundtrack. That's like, it's really inspired a lot of sci-fi soundtracks since then.
And the production design, it's an amazing movie to look at. Mm-hmm. If you do have a Blu-ray player, this is one where you definitely should, it's a must-own Blu-ray, I think, because it's in high def, there's so much you can see.
Yeah, all the detail in the sets are so, like, particularly the outside sets where they're, like, walking down the streets, it's so meticulous and precise.
And I have no idea how they did most of the effects in this movie. Even watching the documentary, it's just like those shots of the giant, like, Chinese lady on the billboard in the city and the things flying through, it's nuts, but it looks great. So that's Blade Runner. Let's move on to Sean's number 6, which I'm excited to talk about.
My number 6 is Akira Kurosawa's Shichinen no Samurai. If you're going to do Japanese titles, I am too.
You should. It's a good title.
Shichinen no Samurai. But it's
Seven Samurai.
Seven Samurai. It's like Akira Kurosawa is one of those directors that I love so many of his movies, and all of them are so good. And I actually honestly, I said The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is my favorite Western movie. It's not exactly true. The Seven Samurai is my favorite Western movie because Akira Kurosawa made the Western genre. If you watch any of his samurai movies, it's like, that's why, Seven Samurai got remade into The Magnificent Seven. Another one of his movies, Yojimbo, got remade into Sergio Leone's A Fistful of Dollars, which is like a shot-for-shot remake. Like, it looks almost exactly like Yojimbo, only set in Italy, and it's in color. And it's got Clint Eastwood instead of Toshiro Mifune. But Seven Samurai is a movie that... It's really hard to describe. Like, it's really long. It's like, is it 3 hours long?
It's 200. I have the length right here. It is 207 minutes. So it's 3 hours, 27 minutes.
So it's a really long movie, and it's split up basically into two halves. And it's such an influential movie in so many ways, where the first half of the movie is basically, the setup is you've got this Japanese town of basically peasants who make their living by harvesting rice and selling it. But these bandits keep on coming and basically have steal all their rice whenever they have a harvest, and these peasants decide that we can't survive if we lose another harvest. So they send 2 villagers over to search and gather a team of samurai. Then it eventually turns into a team of 7 samurai.
Really?
Yeah. Yes, it does.
Okay.
Exactly like the title. I was expecting maybe 8 or 9 samurai, but 7 samurai.
You get 7 of them.
The one thing that I really love is that the title alliterates both in English and in Japanese.
It does.
I love it. Shichinen no Samurai and 7 Samurai. But yeah, and so the villagers go out. They're going to try to find their team of samurai, and they come upon one of my just like a really fascinating character, who's Kanbei. And the way they introduce the character is actually Roger Ebert has commented upon this, that it seems like it's sort of the origin of the action movie cliche of you introduce the character
doing something else.
Yes, doing something else, doing a task that's ancillary to the main plot, but introduces some of their skills and who they are as a person. And what makes Kanbei so fascinating, and actually this whole movie so fascinating, is that it kind of dissects and looks at the concept of honor, which is so important, especially to the Japanese society, and especially the idea of samurai, which is actually, the modern idea of samurai is actually corrupted a lot by basically Japanese imperialist propaganda from the early 20th century. A lot of the ideas of ritual suicide that you expect was really prominent was actually very rarely practiced in actuality. But it dissects this idea of that what honor is in actuality to these group of samurai isn't about serving a shogun or a noble lord. It isn't about fighting in a big war. It's about helping out the people who need you the most and using the skills that you have to help those people.
And fighting and dying for something that matters to you and to others.
And even though the samurai don't get like really rewarded at all, they're not getting paid. They decide, led by Kanbei, to help these peasants out. And the Kanbei character is so interesting because, I mean, one of the things is that his introduction is he's going to go help. This girl has been kidnapped and he's going to go save them. And the first thing he does to make himself seem like a monk is he shaves off his top knot, which is a sign of like who you are as a samurai and a sign of honor and tradition and respect. And he just discards it immediately just to help out this girl. And it introduces who Kanbei is immediately. And it's readily apparent who he is as a person, that he has been through some of the wars. He's like he's the veteran member. He's really intelligent and he's really kind. But you get this sense that he has been through some really dark things in his past, like especially through those wars. This sense that he's seen a lot of stuff and he's trying to kind of almost like repent for it and make up for all the stuff he's done during like the huge wars that they had, and that's one of the reasons why he's going out and help them. And it's like all the performances by the samurai are so well done and so subtle, especially Kanbei, like all the little character things he has. Like throughout the entire movie, I love he has this little like character tick where he rubs his head because he's bald, and he's just like kind of like rubs it casually when he's thinking, and he does it all the time. It's just like it's really relatable that it's like he's still not used to the fact that he doesn't have any hair. And it's such a huge movie. There's so much for you to talk about.
We could do a whole Seven Samurai podcast.
I mean, you really could. I mean, like you said, it's like 3.5 hours long. But yeah, the first half of the movie is them getting the team, which is kind of like now a trope.
Yeah.
Like it's almost like its own genre, which I really love this type of story.
It's awesome.
Yeah, where it's like you like go and you're collecting like a team of elite individuals, and on the way you like find out what you like get to see what each of them are good at, and then at the end they all come together and you see how they work together as a team to overcome a huge obstacle. And all of the samurai, except for there's only one whose name I can never remember, and he's not particularly memorable, even though he's one of the 3 that survive. Spoilers, but I mean it's a 60-year-old
60-year-olds, yeah.
and it's not even important. Like you can't really spoil the movie.
No.
But yeah,
I think you just know going in, because they
yeah,
lay it out.
It's basically a suicide mission. Like they know you only got 7 samurai against an army of like 50 bandits. You've got, I mean, the chances of you succeeding are, especially with like everyone surviving, are basically nothing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you have all like they introduce all these samurai. Like there's Kyuzo, who is the sort of like typical like quiet badass who he's introduced in this really cool duel where he's fighting this guy who's clearly has no idea what he's doing, and Kyuzo just like cuts him down and then runs away, or then he walks away, and he's so calm and cool and collected. But he clearly didn't want to kill the guy, but he had basically no choice.
Yeah. And
then you've got sort of like the classic apprentice Kachiro, who follows Kanbei, and he's kind of the audience proxy. He's the character you identify with the most because he's not particularly well trained. He hasn't been in any real battles before. He obviously isn't really like ready to fight or to kill people yet. There's Heihachi, who gets introduced, and he's just sort of like cutting wood for a living because he instead of like going around and trying to find sort of like despicable work like a Ronin would because there's no wars going on, he's just trying to make a living the most honest way he can find, where he's just chopping wood for a shop.
That's a great scene.
Yeah, and he's a great character. But then there's what is my favorite character. It was just an amazing performance. Is Toshiro Mifune, who is an actor who he's in most Akira Kurosawa movies, and he gives this performance as Kikicho, he's kind of like, I mean, basically he seems like he has like no family. He's like basically like a beggar. And he reveals that he used to be a peasant, but he decides that he wants to be a samurai, and he wants to kind of be something more than what he was born into, and he feels like he can live up to that. Like he can be a samurai, even though he doesn't have the manners or the grace or the training, and he dedicates himself. And he obviously like the most interesting relationship is between him and Kanbei.
Yes.
Because he clearly deeply respects Kanbei, and he wants Kanbei's approval and Kanbei to train him and Kanbei to teach him. But he can't express that in any way because he's such a standoffish, just like aggressive, very childish kind of person. and which is a great contrast to Kanbei, who's very collected, he's very intelligent, he's very calm all the time.
Well, he's probably got the most fascinating arc of the movie, just because he has to earn not just Kanbei's respect, but everyone's. And by the time
I mean, because he doesn't even really, he's not really included into the group until they actually get to the village. Like, he just follows them along while they're on the way to the village, and he just kind of slowly ingratiates himself into their group.
And then, of course, there's the wonderful scene, and it's sort of like part of the fulfillment of his arc, not the full fulfillment, but when they make the flag, and they have they have 6 circles and then a triangle. And Kikuchio asks you, where am I? Where am I? He says, we put you there. You're the special one. And it's sort of a joke, but it's not. And you can tell that means a lot to Kikuchio.
Yeah.
It's one of the only moments where he has real, like, honest emotion. He doesn't try to hide it. It's really cool.
Yeah. And there's so many great, I mean, like, the film has, I mean, it works on one level as, like, one of the best just, like, action movies there is, because the second half of the movie, which is all about the fight after all the 7 samurai come to the village, and it's all about them planning and then executing defending the town from the bandits. And it's just like they spend so much time meticulously setting up, like, you follow Kanbei and his, I think it's actually Gorbei is the one that follows him around, who's another one of the samurai. He's like the first one that gets introduced, but he's not like a specially memorable character. They're going around the town and they're like marking off. It's like, okay, here we're going to like block off this area. Here we're going to try to like funnel them past this way. We're going to use the river as like a defense on one side. It's like, okay, there's a great part where they have to kind of cut off 2 of the houses from the rest of the village that are disconnected. But like the families that live in those houses refuse. They don't want to leave their homes behind. But Kanbei understands you have to make that sacrifice to have a more controlled defense, and that people are going to have to lose things in order for everyone to not lose everything.
And then that comes back really powerfully.
Yeah. And it's like they set up the battle so meticulously, and then as the battle's going on, it's like it sort of goes on in stages. It's like it's not just one huge action scene. There's like calm little beats in between. Every time they kill a guy, Kanbei's sitting there with like a map and he crosses off one circle.
I love how if you have the Criterion Collection release of the movie, in their scene selection, they have the first battle, the second battle, the last battle, the finale. It's very fun. Just and that's how it works. Is sort of there's these stages, and each one gets bigger, and sort of the tension is ratcheting up, and then you get to that last action scene where I hate the visuals where it's the rain. And
the rain's pouring down, and it's just like chaos because the bandits have broken into the village.
And Kikuchio puts all his swords down on the rock, and then he stands up and he takes one out, and he's ready to fight.
It's like it's just such a great scene. It's so emotional because you've been. It's kind of like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, where it's such a big movie, where it's like it's so long and it's such a long journey where you're so invested in what's going on and you want all the characters to survive, even though you know that most of them can't. And you want everyone to succeed and you want everything to turn out okay, but you know that it's not going to. And it's just...
And I love how much Akira Kurosawa has interest and respect for the peasant characters, too.
Yeah.
And there's the last major dramatic scene before the final battle is actually devoted to the peasant, the father of the daughter who the apprentice...
Yeah, Kachiro, sleeps with,
And it's a very powerful sequence that sort of emphasizes the pain and simplicity of these people's lives and how easily it can be sort of vanquished.
Yeah, and how just sort of destructive that the strict sort of like Japanese caste system and that the ideal of honor that they had so strictly imposed at that time, how destructive that had been on their lives. And they're like, and the peasants most of them aren't very likable people. They hide supplies and food from the samurai because they're afraid they're going to steal them. Like the father gets really mad at his daughter for sleeping with the samurai because he doesn't want to be that attached to them, because samurai are the reason in the first place. I mean, the bandits are most likely ex-samurai. They're probably ronin who have no other means of living and have to go around and steal other people's crops in order to make their living. And it's just it's such an interesting dissection of a lot of the sort of like Japanese ideals that were still very strong at the time, but it was in a time in Japanese history when the movie was made where it was after World War II. It was when they're still kind of rebuilding. They were like looking at what had happened to Japan and like looking at what they thought was important. Kurosawa seems to be commenting on a lot of those themes of what like the Japanese ideal of honor is really about and what's really important. And it's so interesting that it's like, and the movie has had such huge influence specifically on Western movies as well, where it's I mean, it's hugely influential in the Western movie market. Like every like action movie you see has been influenced by Kurosawa film in some way, specifically Seven Samurai, most likely.
Well, and it's sort of funny. After I saw the movie, every movie I see now, I keep tying into Seven Samurai, and I have to like stop doing it just consciously. But it's like I have to because it's like that all came from here.
Seven Samurai is a movie that I swear to God, I think about that movie every single day of my life. That movie like pops into my head.
I mean, okay,
in some way.
For the love of God, I went to review the movie Snow White and the Huntsman the other day, and I was saying, wait a second, they did not do the Conway introduction for Chris Hemsworth's character. That's a problem.
Yeah, it's like because now I don't understand like who this kind of character is behind the scenes, and have like it's just a very organic, natural way of introducing the hero that doesn't feel like it's like artificial or constructed in any way.
Okay, so really quickly, I was going to say Seven Samurai is probably one of my favorite movies of all time too. The reason it's not on this list is just because I saw it fairly recently, and I just don't know where it would rank, you know? Because I think when you're talking about favorite, it has to be movies that have been with you a long time.
Yeah.
And so far, Seven Samurai has not. It's another movie that was sort of hard to get my hands on until recently, because the Criterion release is really expensive. And finally, they put it up on streaming on Hulu. The Criterion Collection had it, so I was able to watch it that way. And I just sat down one night, and it was like 11 at night. I was like, I'll watch 1 hour of it or something.
You can't watch 1 hour of the Seven Samurai. You start watching the movie, and you have to finish it.
Yes, and it's so good. It's scene after scene that in any other movie would be the most powerful scene in that movie, and this one has just dozens of them.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it for what feels like a pretty long time. And it's like we still haven't touched on we haven't even touched on the two peasant characters that leave and go, because like the first half of the movie is mostly dedicated. It's like from their perspective.
Yes, and the character I'm looking at my cast and crew guide here in the Criterion release to see if I can remember the name. Is it Yoshio? Who's the one of the old man peasant?
I can't remember the name.
I think
one's like Riku or something like that.
Okay, I think it's Yoshio. And Yoshio is not the village elder, but he's an old man who is sort of the coward who goes out to look for them. And he's one of my favorite characters, and he's the character who I sort of felt like was my touchstone watching the movie. Because he's a man who's been so beaten down by life and expects nothing but misery, and it's so sad to watch him.
Because there's also the two like sort of side characters where it's like in that sort of like hovel where the two peasants are staying, and there's like these two like just kind of like asshole guys who are staying there like making fun of them, and like they steal their rice. It's just like it's really sad and tragic. Yeah. But it's like you feel like a lot of the bad people are bad, but it's not really their fault, because it's like everyone is having such hard times in this movie. Yeah. It's like it's so hard for them to convince the samurai to work for them, even though it's clear that most of the Ronin that are walking around have no job, they have no work. They're just basically living off people's expectation of like, this is what you're supposed to do to a samurai.
Yeah. So it's it's an amazing movie. And I want to talk really quick, I guess, before we move on about the cinematography. I think is essential because it's one of the most gorgeous black and white movies I've ever seen.
There's another one I was talking about, the engraved in my mind is like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, the final scene. There's also like a specific shot in my mind of they have like, it's at the end of the movie, and you've got the three surviving samurai standing in front of a hill that's got the graves of the dead samurai with like their swords sticking in it. It's like such a powerful shot.
Yes. And there's so many of those in the movie. It's so meticulously designed and filmed. And Sean and I, we talked about this the other day, and we agreed we don't think this movie would have the same impact if it were in color. Because the black and white is used so well.
It's definitely a black and white movie. And there's a lot of really great stories, like for any Kurosawa movie, because Akira Kurosawa is one of those directors who's like crazy perfectionist, will go to like great extremes to get what he wants out of the movie. So there's all these stories about how he wouldn't let the actors take off their period clothing for like they like had to be in costume for like a month before filming, and like some of them, like Toshiro Mifune, wasn't allowed to wash because his character's supposed to be very dirty and grimy. And there's also at the like climactic scene where it's raining, he dyed the rain black so that it would look better on camera. So these people are like, so all these guys are pulling off like these like really dramatic action scenes. It's like it's like really, really dramatic, and they're clearly putting their all into this performance, but it's also got to be like shivering cold, and they're like covered in this like disgusting like muddy black water. Yeah. But it's like, it really comes through because it's like, he's just one of those directors where he knows exactly what he wants and he gets it, and it makes the movie so meticulous and perfect.
Yeah. So, Seven Samurai is a great movie. I think if I were to remake this list in 5 years, once I've had time to just sort of absorb this movie into my life, it would definitely be on here. Yeah. Probably pretty high. I think it immediately connected with me. And here's another thing I'll say. I don't watch as many classic movies as some people because I just have this feeling when a movie has been hyped to the degree some movies like this are, and I know the movies so well from, like you said, Looney Tunes cartoons and stuff, they don't have the impact on me that they would have had to people who didn't have to watch them with that hype. But Seven Samurai exceeded any expectations I had for it. It's a movie that not only lives up to the hype, but like you understand every bit of acclaim and hype and conversation it's generated because it's so well done throughout.
Yeah.
Do you kind of know what I mean by that?
Yeah.
And
no,
it's just, yeah.
I understand.
So, Seven Samurai.
Fuck yeah.
Fuck yeah. Okay, we're going to go on to my number 6 choice. This is a movie Sean probably doesn't like. But I don't even know if it's one you've seen.
Oh, I've only seen it once. So it's
Okay.
like it's just like I don't care about it.
I know.
I know it's
Okay.
probably the best out of those movies.
Okay. My number 6 choice is Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban from 2004 by Alfonso Cuarón. And it's the third installment in the Harry Potter series. And this is not just me putting one on here because I think, because Harry Potter is important to my life and I really love the books. And that's all true. I really
and if
do.
that wasn't true, it wouldn't be on the list.
That's it's true. But what I'm also saying, I'm not just picking this because I love the series. It's because this particular movie actually really does have a big impact on me, and I really love it, and I think
Because
it stands.
you love the series, so.
Yes, but I'm... Okay, you don't get what I'm trying to say here.
No, because you're just saying that it's not because you love the series, but it is because you love
It is because I love the series, but I'm not giving a consolation prize to Harry Potter by picking one movie I liked from the series and putting it on the list. That's not my intention here. It's specific stuff
It's not your
about
intention,
this
but
movie.
it might be what you're doing.
Okay, thank you.
I think you should sit and think about that.
Okay. Can I just talk about this? Okay.
Fine.
We'll back up. Harry Potter
Okay.
obviously it's been a very important part of my life. It's the first sort of book series I fell in love with. I mean, I started reading them as soon as they came out, and I was like 6 years old. And I really love the books, and I read them as they came out. It was a really special experience sort of growing up with them. And obviously, the movies were a very interesting experience cinematically. And if you've ever read my work before on my website, jonathanlack.com, I write about Harry Potter a lot, or I did before the series ended. And I think I've established pretty well now my whole thoughts on the series and what the different strengths and weaknesses of the films are and stuff. But Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, specifically the movie, is just a really... I just love this movie so much, and it had to be this high on the list for me just because it's... Not necessarily because if I were to take a deep critical look at it, I would say it's one of the best movies I've ever seen, but because it's just one of my favorites. It goes back to that conversation we started with, where what movies can we watch over and over again, and they just really mean a lot. And this is one of them. And I think it sums up everything that I love about the Harry Potter series, and I think what most people do, and that's that Alfonso Cuarón, and it's sort of depressing this is the only movie he got to do for the series, but he comes in the history of the series. This is the third movie. Christopher Columbus had done the first two, and those are generally regarded as fairly weak adaptations because they're very literal. They don't take a lot of creative leaps with the material. And
They're boring movies.
I think that to a degree, if you're not invested in Harry Potter, they absolutely are.
Yeah.
They're very, very long, for instance. But Alfonso Cuarón came in, and because the first two movies were such huge successes, he was given like total creative freedom. And he ran with it, and it's sort of... It's a controversial movie still among fans because there are a lot of fans who are those who I don't like to talk to, who are the really stupid fucking nerds who are like, when the movie stopped, adapting every single scene and word of the book,
yeah.
I'm mad. And I never wanted that. And again, the Harry Potter books...
Like, anyone who wants that's insane, because that would be like the worst movie ever.
Yeah, and it's true with any book. It's
Yeah.
true with any book. And for me, it's
Especially
like...
that book.
Okay.
It's not that good of a book, but...
Thank you, Sean.
So it's like I have to say it was. I don't like Harry Potter.
Okay. You want to get that out right now? So
Yes, I don't like Harry Potter.
Okay.
And it's really
It's
hard.
okay, Sean.
It's really hard to grow up in a world where every contemporary person you know is obsessed with Harry Potter. So it scarred me a little bit.
Okay,
but.
sorry. What I was saying about Prisoner of Azkaban, though, is Alfonso Cuarón comes in. He completely redesigns everything Christopher Columbus had. He redesigns Hogwarts Castle. He redoes the costumes. He redoes the locations. They moved from England to Scotland to shoot it, and beautiful areas they got. Redesigns all the creatures, all sorts of things. And in some sense, he brings the design much more in line with the book, where now I think they have a larger budget. He makes it he does the scope of what J.K. Rowling wrote in terms of Hogwarts and sort of how magic is represented in the books. He gets that much more accurate, but he also changes a lot. He cuts a ton out of the book. He adds some stuff. He changes the particulars. He makes it very cinematic and I think very personal to his own interest as a filmmaker, and it comes across to me as just a great movie separate of what your expectations are from the book or of the rest of the film series. It's the most standalone installment probably of the books, where it really is just a character study about Harry and sort of his relationship to his parents and to his memories and how he's grown up in this world without parents and without knowing about magic, and that's represented by the Sirius Black storyline that you're probably all familiar with, the titular prisoner of Azkaban, who's his godfather. And I think it's... yeah. Yes, and it's all very much about, I think, the sort of... it's about grief, and this is a thing that you're going to see a lot on this list, is I have a lot of movies that deal with that, and it's a powerful theme to me, and this is definitely one about the grief of losing loved ones and how we cope with that, and I think it's a very powerfully done story in that way, and especially in how it's presented in the movie. This, to me, is the pinnacle of the entire Harry Potter universe, books and movies. It's the best thing to come out of the series, and it's really powerful to me, the way they whittle down the story and represent it, and Alfonso Cuarón got just miraculous performances out of everybody. Not just the kids, who are better than ever here, but the adults, too. He really got some wonderful work out of people like the actor who plays Remus Lupin, whose name I'm blanking on. It's David Thewlis. And that's a great character who's really brought to life well in the movie, and sort of how his relationship with Harry develops as sort of a surrogate father. And it is very much about the way we fill emotional voids. And I think it speaks to something more universal than other parts of the Harry Potter universe do, especially in the later movies when it has to become very much... it has to become more about the fight against, Voldemort and sort of the overall plot of the movies. And this one, to me also, Sean, you've talked about before, one of your frustrations with the Harry Potter series is you don't like how some of the character arcs develop.
And it's just, I think there's too much, especially, it's more a problem with the books. There's so much character fluff.
Okay. Well, what I was going to say is, and I disagree with that, but I know what you mean. I disagree with it.
They don't need to be 300-page books. I'm just saying that they don't need to be 300 pages.
What I was trying to say is that I think Prisoner of Azkaban, one of the strengths of it, that even people who generally aren't into the series, and I know you dislike all of it, but people who are not necessarily into
I will say, I don't remember, Prisoner of Azkaban is one of the books that I actually did read. It's actually the last one I actually read before I realized it wasn't a good series. And then I don't remember the movie that well, but I do remember that I liked it more than any of the other ones.
Okay.
So,
and that's what I'm trying to say, is they really narrow in on character arcs, and they do it really well, where every character has a very clear transition point in this movie from where they are at the beginning of the movie to the end, and it develops very well. But I guess the thing that makes this movie very, very powerful to me, and why I love it, and I'm always sort of thinking about it in terms of my favorite movies, is the imagery and what Alfonso Cuarón does with the design of this world and the atmosphere of this world. I think one of the things I and many people who love the books love is that the way J.K. Rowling writes and sort of the imagination she has about the world really creates a sort of universe that we're very fascinated by, and there's a lot we love about it. And Alfonso Cuarón figured out how to do that on film, because J.K. Rowling does it through prose, she doesn't do it through visuals. Christopher Columbus did not figure out how to do that through visuals. He did very stereotypical magical images that are not representative of what the books do. Alfonso Cuarón used his own imagination and did something very different. And so this is a movie where I feel like there actually is magic inhabiting this world. And I think that's something that's very difficult to pull off in fantasy filmmaking, even the best fantasy films. And this one really does that well. It's just a visual marvel. I've said before, it's my favorite my favorite live action visual movie, just in terms of to look at. And it really is. It's beautifully shot. It's got this color palette that I've never seen even remotely attempted anywhere else, where they're cooled off, but they're not washed out, where they're very vibrant, but they don't sort of stick out in a garish way. It's just really beautiful to look at. There's a very icy atmosphere to it that comes from, in the book, it's inspired by sort of the idea of the Dementors and of darkness, but they make it into very much a visual thematic motif in this movie. Just a lot of that. John Williams, this is one of his all-time best scores. I'm in the small but vocal camp that says the John Williams scores for movies 1 and 2 are actually not that good. They're sort of John Williams on autopilot. This one, John Williams had clearly a lot of visual inspiration, and he really ran with it. And it's a great score. It threw out every theme that the series had used up to that point and started over, and it sounds really great. So I really love this movie, and, Sean does not.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I think, and
I'm
again,
just trying not to say things.
well, thank you, Sean. Thank you
You're
for
welcome.
letting me have this. I guess one of the things I will just to end with again is I think it builds so well, and it does the time travel sequence at the end so well. And I am a fucking sucker for anything with time travel in it, and I really love how Prisoner of Azkaban utilizes the time travel concepts. And Alfonso Cuarón found really creative ways to visually represent that. And then
I forgot there was time travel. By the way.
yeah, it's really good. It's really well done. And
It's really well done. I probably would have remembered it.
okay. Thank you.
Shit, I forgot. I said things. I'm sorry.
It's okay, Sean. But then I think the ending is a very, very effectively emotional ending. I really love the final scenes between Sirius Black and Harry Potter, and again, and then sort of the power of friendship, which is another theme of the series, and how they represent that with the main trio. And again, I really can't praise the work of the three main actors in this one enough. They're really good in this one, and it actually took them another couple of movies to get back to the point they were with Alfonso Cuarón, especially Emma Watson, who by the time the series is over, everyone mostly agreed she was the best actress of the young people, and probably has a good career in front of her. You saw that for the first time in Prisoner of Azkaban, and she's very good in this, and there's a lot of satisfying moments involving her. So that's Prisoner of Azkaban. You know, if you're a Harry Potter person, you know what I'm talking about, unless you're one of the crazy, stupid fans who hates it because, I don't know, it doesn't include 10 scenes with Buckbeak. I don't know.
They're probably casting some, like, stupid curse with their stupid wands.
Oh, this is also where Michael Gambon stepped in as Dumbledore, and he's really good, and love the work he does here. I think Michael Gambon's great in these movies.
And there's Alan Rickman and Gary Oldman.
Oh,
Sirius
Alan!
Black,
I
so-
should say that. Alan Rickman.
I mean, that's
Yeah.
one thing I will say about Harry Potter. Alan Rickman is awesome in the movies.
And this is one of his best ones, because he's in it a lot. He gets a lot of stuff
Yeah.
to do, and he's really good in it. And then, Gary Oldman, man, he
Any movie with Alan Rickman and Gary Oldman can't be that bad, so I understand why it's on the list.
And they get to square off
Yeah.
for like 10 minutes. It's great. So, love all that stuff. Love David Thewlis and all the other adult performers. Just great cast.
The way he said that sounded like they were like porn stars or something. All the other adult performers.
All right, well,
It's a very
Yes.
adult movie.
so we are at the halfway point on both of our lists. We've each presented 5 movies, had some good discussions, but we're also at
We
2
had
out-
some bad discussions. We had some laughs. We had some tears.
It feels like the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's like it's been many different.
Yeah.
You know.
I
know.
And you're... Well, I'm not going to say it.
But wait, what?
If it was a video podcast, you would understand.
Okay. So we are going to take a break now.
I called you ugly.
Thank you, Sean.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Next week, a week from today, when this podcast is out, you'll hear part 2. We're going to talk about numbers 5 through 1 on our list. And lots more great discussions to have. We just know that if we did it all now, this podcast would be 5 hours long, and you don't want to have that in. We like long podcasts.
Yeah, but that's a bit ridiculous. Like,
So anyway, you just come back next week, subscribe,
yeah,
WGTC.
you specifically. Yeah, you. Yes, I'm talking you. Yes, come back next week.
Subscribe, WGTC Radio. You can find us in iTunes. We'll try to put it in other places too, but you can find us streaming online. Please visit www.wegotThiscovered.com for more. I'm Jonathan Lack,
And I'm Sean Chapman.
and we'll talk about the rest of our favorite movies next week.
Goodbye.